Yeah, all right. Well, yeah, no, good to go. So we're going to talk about Hannibal Barca, and the Second Punic War. But I thought maybe we could talk about the generation before that, or maybe pick up
Well,
more or
yeah,
less the generation where Pyrrhus finished.
yeah. I was gonna say like we might have to make this like a two-parter or something because I think we do have to. We don't have to go into depth on the
Hmm.
First Punic War, but I mean we could if you want. I'm happy to because this just happens to be like this whole like era of the Mediterranean is just one. It's just my favorite. I just love it.
Me too. When I was at uni, it was sort of the thing I tried to focus on as much as
Yeah,
possible. The rise of Rome up to the
yeah.
age of Augustus, sort of thing. Yeah.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's like a game of Rome Total War. It's really exciting stuff.
Yeah, if there's
Um,
any period that is like a bit like a game of Total War or Civilization or something, you could definitely argue this is one of them.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely, because there's this period between well, the start of the Punic War 264 until the fall of Carthage and Corinth, which was supposed to be in the
Mm,
same year 146.
yeah,
So in that period of 120 odd years or so,
yeah.
all the historians say that's when Rome exploded. It went from just being sort of a regional power in
Mm.
Italy a bit to being the dominant hyperpower of the Mediterranean. And of course, the Punic Wars are just right in there. That's the big part of it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And then the whole thing is in flux. Everything's changing. You can see that like it's becoming more Eastern. I think as well. I think there's
Mhm.
definite argument for the sort of Eastern Empire influence, and I think that's always been the case. You can look at like the Bronze Age, where they're aping Eastern empires and stuff like that. I think, but anyway,
Yeah, so the first Punic War then is, well, it's a lot to do with Hannibal's father, Hamilcar, isn't it? He's like sort of one of the main. He's the
well,
main.
yeah, like the so the way the world is working at this point is the fact that Rome is very clearly on the rise and other people can see it. It's starting to take over large chunks of Italy. It's just driven off Pyrrhus, who was a famous Greek king, and
Yeah, no small feat. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And the thing is, any other people Pyrrhus probably would have quite easily conquered. He drove the Carthaginians out of Sicily, no problem. He just had he been at his full strength, I think at the beginning of his life, I think he could have quite easily overcome pretty much anyone else because of the sort of technological advantage that the Diadochi had over the rest of the world, really. But the Romans just have this stupid ability to just keep driving up, bringing up armies, and it's definitely to their advantage. But yeah, so the first Punic War begins because of the militarization of Italy. There are roving companies of mercenaries around, and one of these companies called the Mamertines sails over to Sicily. And on the northeastern tip of Sicily, there's a city called Messina, a small city, and they occupy it, kill the men, marry the women, and then settle down to be like the overlords of that little area, illicitly gained. And then they start getting attacked by was it Hiero the Second of Syracuse or Hiero the First? I can't remember which one it was. And they appeal to Carthage and Rome at the same time for help. And the Carthaginians respond and send a garrison over and make Hiero stand down. And the Romans are aware that there's a Carthaginian garrison and are like, you know what, fuck it. They put it to the people and think, yeah, no, we'll expand our empire into Sicily because they didn't otherwise have any interest in that and just went for it. And as I recall, they drive out the Carthaginian garrison, and that sparks the First Punic War, which largely takes place in Sicily under
Yeah.
what was Hannibal's father again?
Hamilcar.
Hamilcar. That's it. There's so many Hasdrubal,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
so they all sound the same. But yeah, Hamilcar, who himself was a great general, I think, but he seems to have been under resourced in the fight. But they fight to a standstill, don't they? And
Yeah.
they draw up like lines of demarcation around the Mediterranean, in sort of much the same way that European empires did when it came to the sort of age of discovery. They sort of started carving up sections of the world because they obviously
Mm.
understood that they were the major powers in the region. Did I get all that right?
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. I think that like the fact that Rome and Carthage came to blows over Sicily was sort of when you look at the map, it seems a bit inevitable, really, the way they were
Yeah,
both
yeah,
expanding. That, as quite rightly you say, Rome in that period has expanded to dominate all of mainland, nearly all of mainland Italy. But
yeah.
Carthage controlled sort of North Africa, or big chunks of North Africa all around, modern day Tunisia, and a big chunk of southern Spain. But also they controlled Corsica, Sardinia, and at least had sort of, I don't know how to describe it, like a de jure power in Sicily. So when the Romans get down there, one way or another, whether it's through the Myrmidons or Pyrrhus or whatever, but you were of course right. It was going to happen that Carthage and Rome were going to clash, and I think it's important to remember that Rome were the new boys on the block. At that point, they were the upstarts, really.
So I think there are key differences between Rome and Carthage, even though they're both republics that people have to be aware of. And the first one is that the Carthaginians come from the Middle East. They're a colony of the city Tyre, and which makes them Semitic
Phoenician,
merchants from the Middle East, very, very mercantile area of the world. And that's what Carthage's primary focus on. And so we're told by the Roman sources, because we don't have any Carthaginian sources, because they eventually lost this series of wars, spoiler alerts, that we're told that the requirement for being in the Carthaginian Senate wasn't heritage, it wasn't hereditary, it was financial. You just had to have a certain amount of money. And it didn't matter how long ago you'd earned this money, but if you'd made it big, then you got to be a part of it. Whereas the Romans were very patriarchal and based on a hereditary aristocracy, an aristocratic class. But it's not just the difference in the kinds of people that they are and the kinds of values that they have. It's also a difference in the kind of empires that they've cultivated. Like the Carthaginian Empire is a colonial trading empire. It's actually quite a lot like the British Empire. It was like all along the coasts of North Africa, Spain, and even further around. So they had some exploratory expeditions. We don't actually know how far around they got, but they discovered gorillas at some point. No, seriously, they captured.
Yeah, I didn't know that, really.
No, yeah, it was Hanno the Navigator, or they all sound like basically the same bloody names. So I'll probably mess the name up. But I think it was Hanno the Navigator who sailed around outside of the Straits of Gibraltar and around the coast of Africa, and they captured female gorillas and brought them back. But they didn't know they weren't humans. They treated them like they were people. They assumed they were a kind of people because they looked similar enough. They didn't think of them just as animals. But obviously they didn't know what the hell they were doing. But anyway, the Carthaginians would set up sort of trading posts and then exert influence over local tribes using money and intimidation because they'd maintained this large mercenary army. But that also meant they could just recruit men from everywhere because they were the ones known to have, the resources and the sort of infrastructure available. So the Carthaginian army became this amazing, and I don't have to use the words like diversity and stuff like that because they're so politically toxic these days. But the Carthaginian army really does have the interesting aspect of being from the entire Western Mediterranean and Eastern actually, in parts. It's really, really interesting, and you get told about how the men are paid, and some of them are paid in X or goat skins or whatever, and we're told that the slingers from the Balearic Islands are paid in oiled women, like oiled slave women. I'm not even joking. I'm not joking. That's ironically how they were paid. It's like, well,
specifically oiled.
Yes.
Don't want dry ones.
Well, why would you? I mean, I guess that's how it works. And so they end up, they end up with this really interesting mercenary army. And I don't know how much you want to talk about the First Punic War, but basically after the war, Carthage has a real problem because they decide they're not going to pay the army, which sucks. And then so the army revolts when it's in North Africa, and Hamilcar has to raise a new mercenary army to then go and put down the old mercenary army, which they butcher. And I remember reading about this and thinking, wow, that is fucking heartless. Because normally when how long did the First Punic War last for?
It's like 20 years.
Yeah,
23 years, something like that.
Yeah, right. Because people have got to remember that in the old world, everything took a long time. Like sieges could last a year or 10 years. The siege of Tyre by Nebuchadnezzar II lasted 13 years, which is why it was so impressive that Alexander did it in like 6 months. Everything took a long time to happen.
Yeah, I think where you said a couple of points you made there. I think one of the, where you said Hamilcar and the Carthaginian army in Sicily couldn't really rely on the Carthaginian Senate to send them reinforces. That happens again and again and again. I think it's interesting. I want to ask you about the nature of the Barca family and how they relate. That they're not a standing army the way the Romans have. But just before we go into that, I really want to say something about how you say that the nature of their empire is very different to the Roman one. Absolutely. The Carthaginian Empire puts me in mind of something like the medieval Venetian or perhaps Genoese Empire. Just this mercantile trading hub. It's almost just like a hub that all the spokes go out from, and it's insanely rich and controls a lot of influence and power, but isn't necessarily the same thing as your classic British Empire, Mongolian Empire, Roman Empire. It's not the same thing.
The British Empire was a lot closer to what it was. Like Venice is actually, as you say, is a much better example, but Britain's not so different in many ways. But like Rome has got it's the sort of administrative empire that we think of when we think of Rome. Whereas with Carthage, I'm as far as I'm aware, the Carthaginians had no particular interest in administering the various tribes. Like they just use them for labor, as far as I can tell.
And it seems that the Carthaginians didn't put much emphasis on trying to convert their people to feel like they were Carthaginians, which is what the Romans did do. And I was listening to something interesting just the other day that was saying that the archaeology, the classic thing in a Roman town, whether it be in northern England or Iraq, is that you'll have communal areas, baths, temples, and agora, things like that. And all the Carthaginian settlements and towns, they don't have that. There's no real there's no communal area as such. You're not really invited to feel like part of a collective. It's very different, very different.
Yeah, it's very exclusive, the Carthaginian one. Carthage itself was like again, like one of those. It definitely had a dimension of ethnic superiority to it. The Carthaginians definitely would have, I think, looked down on the non-Carthaginians, and I think that they viewed themselves as something to be defended, like in the culture and the way that they operated and things like that. Like they weren't expanding and incorporative like the Romans were, right? And that's I think the key difference between them is that everything with the Romans is done by like oaths, and there's narrative behind it. But with a lot of the Carthaginian stuff, it just seems to be about coin. And it's interesting how the two things change. And what's really interesting about that is how that doesn't seem to be the case for Hannibal, which I find really fascinating, because Hannibal grows up in his father's army during the First Punic War, and becomes how old is he when he takes over the army? Something like 26 or something like that, because his father dies in battle, saving him. And so, like, not to fast forward or anything, but it's weird. This is why I find the massacre of the first, the Carthaginian army that doesn't get paid, to be really, it's shockingly heartless. Like I can't get over it. And the thing is that the men had returned from the war. They didn't lose the war either, and so the fact that the Carthaginians didn't pay them what they're due is weird. It's like, why wouldn't you? Carthage has the money, because one of the things about Carthage is it was settled on extremely rich soil at the mouth of the river, of whatever river it is. I can't remember off the top of my head. But so the harvests were always fantastic there, because it's in North Africa. North Africa during this time period was greener than it is now, 2,000 years later. So it was very fertile and very, very rich, because the position it inhabits at the trade route, at the crossroads between like the resource-rich areas of Western Europe and the markets of the East, means that basically all Mediterranean traffic can flow through it, and it becomes this insanely wealthy thing. And that wealth just continues on after it ends up losing these wars until it gets destroyed. So yeah, the idea that the Carthaginians didn't have the money to pay this mercenary army is obvious horseshit. Just my historical judgment on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And doesn't it come up again and again that the Carthaginian Senate seemed to make really miserly decisions a lot? Like that's sort of one of the main things that characterizes them. It's like, oh God, you cheapskates! If only you'd spent
Yes.
a little bit of treasure right here, everything could have been different. And it's like, it's maddening, the decisions they make.
So yeah, they do. I think they get overemphasized in this regard. Like, I think that it seems that they're worse than they are, but they are quite bad, and it is annoying how there isn't just a general sort of like, okay, like empty the purses. We're gonna if it was me, in control of it, all right, and we're all gonna chip in. We're gonna get this 100,000 man army and with 100,000 man navy, and then we're just gonna use all of this wealth to annihilate the Romans, and then when we're done, we'll just make more. You would think it would be an all-out war, but the thing is, it's not a total war to them. But the Romans do go into total war, and this is the real difference, because the logistics of their empires, like the Romans have more population, but the Carthaginians don't need direct control over populations to draw without outside of the resources. So they both got access to vast resources, even though the Romans definitely have more. But the Romans have got this fucking attitude, and that's the only way that I can describe it, and it really is. And I think that the entire Second Punic War hinges on this question. It is, does the Roman ever accept that he's been defeated? And the answer is no. Why not? Because he is a Roman, right? And that seems to be the entire ethos behind all of it, just the arrogance and the flat denials of reality and the sort of pig-headishness that the Romans had. And I think that Hannibal's mission into over the Alps into Italy and to defeat the Romans was all about making them beg for mercy. It wasn't about destroying Rome. Destroying Rome was not the goal. It was making the Roman admit that he's human.
Which he refuses to do at any price.
Exactly, which he refuses to do. Spoiler alert. But this is the difference, because the Carthaginians did not like war at all. The Carthaginians would rather have not had war.
Well, it's expensive, isn't it?
Exactly. It costs them money. What do they need war for? They succeed in peacetime. Peacetime is when property is preserved, when trade can go on unhindered. These are the people who are winning in the peacetime, so they don't want war. There's no good for them. But to the heroic-minded Romans who want to, embrace their Trojan ancestry, they're all about war. They love war. I mean, like, the Romans are the most warlike people in the entire Mediterranean world at this point. They're the ones with something to prove, and they're proving it. So, you've got to kind of feel sorry for them, because in the First Punic War, it is the Romans who trigger it. And the Carthaginians don't want to fight it. They fight it to a standstill. They have this peace. And I can't remember, how many years is it between the two Punic Wars? I should check.
Well, the next, the Second Punic War starts in 218, and the last one ends in...
Right, so it's about 20 years. So it's about a generation. Right, okay.
So one of the things you said there I thought was really interesting was about how Carthage still does, even though it is just some sort of mercantile infrastructure, it still does command somehow a fair bit of loyalty or authority from at least the Barca family. So one great example is that Hannibal himself remains absolutely 100% loyal to everything the Carthaginian Senate asked him to do. But he left Carthage when he was 9 years old. And doesn't ever return until right at the end for the last campaign there against Scipio, when he's a fully grown man. So it is strange that it never seemed to cross his mind. It doesn't seem that he would just work for himself. He's always completely loyal to them, even though they screw him over often.
He's like 1,000 miles away from Carthage in Spain, like as essentially the emperor of his own empire in Spain, and yet he's totally loyal and continues sending stuff back to Carthage. I was like I was saying about the ethnic component. I think there was a very strong preference with Carthaginians for themselves, in the same way that the Greeks had a strong, a lot of people had a strong preference for their own in-group, obviously, and the Carthaginians, it comes across very clearly when you're reading about the Carthaginians I found. And it seems to be that they viewed themselves as better than the barbarians that were around them, which, given their standard of living, was probably an understandable view that they had. They came from civilization, whereas back at that time, like, it's just Iron Age tribes in Spain. So, I mean, that's their perspective on the world. So I think that it was that component, that there was keeping Hannibal tethered to Carthage, because, like you say, he left at 9 years old, and he owed the place nothing really. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, it really doesn't really owe them anything. I mean, as I sort of hinted at before, the relationship between the Barca family, Hannibal and Hannibal's dad, their family, and the state, it seems to be sort of a fairly strange relationship. They're not mercenaries. They're more than mercenaries, that they remain loyal, but they're not sort of a formal arm of the state, shall we say? Like the consular armies.
Well, no,
of Rome.
they are. Hannibal.
Are they? The Barca family.
Yeah. So I was.
Explain.
Yeah. Let me tell you what book I was reading, and this came up. I think it was by Harold Lamb. I've just got to get my library up.
Because I always thought, just while you do that, I always thought it was like an ambiguous relationship to an extent.
Right.
That they often the Senate would say, pay for everything yourself. This is your expedition. This is your campaign, your baby. You're doing it on our behalf, but it's your thing. So that's different to being an arm of the state formally, I think. Or no?
No, but that's the thing. He did consider himself to be an arm of the state. In Hannibal, One Man Against Rome, Harold Lamb's a historian from the early 20th century. Talks about how he describes himself as the commander of the armed forces of Carthage, and that was definitely the role that his father had in the First Punic War, and so I don't see why he wouldn't just inherit that position. And so I do think that it is an official arm of the state. And then after the war, I mean, he goes back into the Senate as some sort of aristocrat and nobleman because of his position. So I think it is like an official position, although, like you say, we can't be sure because everything is ambiguous because we don't have their records. Thanks, Rome. But I think it was. But I guess it was just a hereditary position for that family.
Well, I suppose, that may at least that. I mean, so for example, for Rome and much more as we know armies, you get a command, a formal command or a commission for a command that has a certain amount of time, etc., etc. Whereas this seems to be, it's just
but this is why Rome is so different.
That family are nominated to be the generals.
Yes, no, but that happens all over the place in the Mediterranean world. So in Athens, for example, the Alcmonidae family was the family that dealt with certain aspects of the state. Like, these noble families are often very big and very influential, and they just are given a section of what the state does. There are other examples as well, but for some reason I can't pull one off the top of my head.
No, I know what you mean. I think maybe Rome is more the exception in the ancient world, if anything.
But I mean, there is still that sort of tradition in Rome. Like, you've got the Scipii family. There is this sort of the same sort of tradition, although I don't think it's as formalized as in other places. But it definitely was something that happened in ancient cities. You got powerful families that would just become a part of the state.
Yeah. Well, no, saying that about then Hamilcar, because one thing usually people think Hannibal just took over when Hamilcar died. Hamilcar died in some sort of sordid little skirmish somewhere in Spain. It wasn't glorious or anything. And it wasn't actually Hannibal who took over. It was his brother-in-law, Hasdrubal the Fair, but he only lasts for a couple of years before he's assassinated by a slave. Quite a funny little story. And then Hannibal takes over.
Yes, and he's 26 when he takes over.
Yeah, which is fairly young, isn't it? But he's a full-grown man. He seems to know what he's doing immediately, doesn't he?
Well, I mean, he's been living with the army his entire life.
Yeah, well, there's one anecdote I definitely want to say of which is really famous, almost one of the cliches about Hannibal from his childhood, was that apparently his father, again when he's about 10 or 12 or something, his father was going to go off in campaigning into Spain, and even though the boy Hannibal is only, as I say, 10 or something, he's invited to come along, and beforehand his father puts him through some kind of it's Polybius that describes it best, puts him through some sort of ceremony, some sort of formal deal where he has to swear that he will be the enemy of Rome forever until his dying breath, and that seems to have left an indelible mark on Hannibal, they say.
that yes, but I think that there's a nuance here that people are overlooking because, like, as I recall, the wording was never be a friend of Rome or a friend
Mm.
to Rome or something like that. And friend of Rome is a designation that foreign powers can have. Like Arminius, the German leader who Caesar drives back into Germania, has the designation of friend of Rome because at some point it's a diplomatic honorific, basically. And so I wonder if Hamilcar is specifically referring to that because in all of Rome's foreign relations, and this underpins the point I was making earlier, in all of Rome's foreign relations, it is the superior party in every treaty it signs. I can't think of a single treaty Rome signs between any two powers, Rome and someone else, in which the Romans are in the inferior position. And it's that arrogance that I think Hannibal was trying to break. I think he wanted them to be inferior rather than destroy them. And I think friend to Rome is that. I think that's implied in there that you're kind of subservient to Rome. And I think that, I think there might be a more sort of allegorical way of looking at what he's saying there. And he's saying never bend the knee to Rome, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that I think that Hannibal's behavior and the fact that he launches this giant fucking it's a manic expedition if you think about what he goes on. And I'm thinking, fucking hell, this is a guy who has a serious problem with Rome, right? His father's just like, never bend the knee to Rome. It's like, okay, make them bend the knee. It's like, okay, and it's a mad adventure he has to go on to do it. But I think there's that ethos behind it, and I think that Scipio gets it as well. But we'll come to that long in the future.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Well, a lot of people, most historians, I think, actually say, and it's hard to disagree with that. Yeah, Hannibal had it was some sort of a serious psychological thing for him that he was going to pick up the torch, his father's torch of despising Rome. That he was going to pick that up and run with it. A lot of people are, quite badly psychologically wounded or forever different when you lose someone very close to you. If you hero worship your father and then he's killed, for some people, and it seems for Hannibal, that was it. That was his whole life from then on, was to live out what his father would have wanted at any cost. And that's how it sort of plays out, isn't it? It's hard to deny that's what it looks like. He seems to be
kind of redeeming his father's honor or something.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure that in Harold Lamb's telling of it, he says that it's Hamilcar who wants to go to Spain and build the empire up there. So not only can they pay the Romans what they owe, but also they can. Basically, his plan is just to build a giant army and then go march on Rome. I get I'm sure it was Harold Lamb I read not essentially his father's plan, but it definitely was his father's plan. He was definitely going to do this. Not that he told his son to go do it, but I get the feeling that he probably had this in the works, and the point of getting the massive Spanish Empire was to get the resources to go and smash the Romans.
Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah, so absolutely. There's the strategic picture at this point is that, well, the Carthaginians have been booted out of Sicily essentially, and that there's all sorts of revolts and quite a messy picture, I think, going on in Corsica and Sardinia over the next few decades. There's just multiple revolts, and they seem to switch back and forth. They obviously, at the end of it all, end up in Roman hands, but Sardinia actually seems to be very, very rich in minerals. There's silver and gold mines and tin mines, and so it's like that is worth fighting over, But yeah, the Carthaginians realize that if they're going to keep expanding, the best, most obvious place is in Spain.
Yeah.
And so that's what they do. But I would just say that Polybius talks about this probably the most. That there's a whole war going on in the east as well, in Greece and Macedonia and Illyria. And so actually Rome in this period are committed all over the place. They're basically fighting a war on two fronts. And I mean, it might not be a great analogy, but it puts me in mind of, well, you think of obviously Germany in World War One and Two. It's their nightmare to fight on two fronts because it's not really doable. But then you also think of maybe America in World War Two. They fight in the European and the Japanese theatre and are successful in both, but only because they're sort of an absolute behemoth. Their industry is just absolutely unparalleled. And I think maybe that's obviously not industry, but a rough parallel with Rome. They are actually able to fight on two fronts at the same time over a long period, and in the end win, because they do seem to have this this machine for pumping out legions, which we talked about in one of our other videos, haven't we? That their ability to do that. So I just want to say that if we're not probably going to talk much about Philip V of Macedonia and all the machinations and back and forths on the eastern side of the empire, but Polybius's point, the whole sort of reason that he was writing his history was to chronicle both of those things, and so they're going on at the same time. But in Spain, the Carthaginians sort of they found the Barca family found Carthago Nova, New Carthage, which is modern day Cartaginian, isn't it?
Cartagena or something.
I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. Hannibal has successes straight off the bat. It seems like he's one of those people in history that drops into a command and is immediately good at it.
Well, he was raised with it. He's raised in the army of his, of his father in Spain. So it's not like he can just go off and do something else. Like what other choices does he have? And I'm sure that they would have. Like I know that Hamilcar was struck his image on coins, and I recall reading something years ago. Essentially, the Barcid family were trying to get some kind of mystical narrative around themselves in order to essentially kind of wow over the tribes to their cause and give them a kind of legitimacy and spin a web of legitimacy around themselves. So this is a reason for like the elephants and the coinage and all this, and the elephants on the coins, and the magisterium they're trying to present. And I think this is part of the reason for the allegiance of Carthage as well, because Carthage would represent some far off shimmering city that can produce. Look at this fucking amazing army that he's got. It's gonna have the best weapons. He's got elephants. He's got all this cavalry. Look at all this money they've got. And they're so successful. So there's this spell that you start casting over tribe, just Celtic and Iberian tribesmen who are fighting each other every weekend. Like there's something magisterial about what Hannibal and Hamilcar were trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's a good point. Just a quick sort of aside, in a way, the Roman conception of Hannibal after this. So we've got a lot that survives from the age of Caesar and Augustus. People like Ovid and Juvenal, people that wrote poems and wrote satires, not just histories. And so, or the letters of Pliny and Cicero, and so we get a feel for, we're talking 200 years later. So it's like a Napoleon figure in your past, and the way they feel about him, there's a lot of respect there, So a bit like Napoleon. We know he's the baddie, he's the bad guy. We're the good guy, but also it's sort of revered in a way, or it's just a very, very interesting figure that you don't out and out despise in any way.
Well, same with like Rommel in the Second World War.
Right.
What it is you've got to recognize the talent of your opponent. Even if you beat them, if they are such a great threat, then they must have been such a great talent. There must have been virtue there, and that's definitely the case. I think it's a mark of honor, to be honest. That the Romans were able to recognize Hannibal as being as good as he is. Because the thing is, when you're describing Hannibal's career, he actually, in my opinion, comes off sounding a lot like the good guy from the Romans' own description of him. Because he doesn't go around looting towns. He doesn't go around raping and murdering or anything like that. He's very professional, and that's one of the interesting things. Like he's not just a butcher. The Romans kill so many more innocent people than Hannibal does. Hannibal kills state assets. He's defeating armies. And he persuades a lot of people over to his cause, because a lot of people did have a lot of good reason to resent the Romans. So it's very interesting how Hannibal manages the entire war, to be honest.
There's a lot of politics to go along with the battles. Sure.
Yeah, but exactly. And the way that the Romans frame how he is invested in what's happening, because one of the ways that he approaches the tribes of Italy is saying, look, I'm the commander of the armed forces of Carthage. I'm here to free you from Rome. I'm not here to establish an empire. I'm here to liberate you. And so, from the Romans' own sources, it kind of sounds like he's a hero to the common downtrodden people of Italy, going to come here and free them from the Romans. And the things, I don't think that Hannibal did have an intention of setting up an Italian empire. I just think he wanted Romans to bend the knee. And so from the Romans' own description of Hannibal, he comes across as very measured and stoic and restrained, great control of himself and his own army, and it doesn't do anything horrific. There are no horror stories from Hannibal. The horror stories all come from the Romans controlling the armies, going, fuck, he's butchered another of our armies. Fuck, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? They're the people who are bothered about Hannibal. It's not the regular folk. And so, yeah, I like.
He's really professional.
From his enemies' writings of him, his character comes through as being very strong and very disciplined, and very this as well when he's in exile with the Seleucids. It's very, very interesting how he continues his life mission of destroying Rome in the Greek courts. But again, that's way in the future.
That's quite an interesting theme in the ancient Roman historians, that they quite often paint their enemies as really sympathetic. So there's like Vercingetorix against Caesar, and a lot of the German rulers, even though they end up coming to Rome and being ritualistically executed, they're still by the historians, they're still painted in a quite sympathetic way. Like it's almost hard not to feel sorry for them. And of course, the Roman historians do that with Belzon, really, for Hannibal.
But I think Hannibal's virtues probably are accurate, because you've got to be the kind of man who keeps his shit together to do half of what Hannibal did.
He must have been a very, very disciplined soldier to do what he did. Yeah, no question. I think, sure.
Yeah. But yeah, so after the First Punic War, they set up this empire that covers probably about a third of Spain, something like that, or maybe just over a third. But again, it's kind of loose affiliation. But then it's Hannibal that provokes the war, isn't it?
Yeah, so once he gets into the command, he has one or two battles straight away. There's one at the River Tagus, and he straight away. Well, he's got two brothers, one called Mago and one called Hasdrubal, another Hasdrubal, who are they're his younger brothers, and they're sort of his right-hand men. And even in one of his first battles at the River Tagus, he uses some sort of elaborate smoke signal to do a hidden cavalry ambush. So he looks like he's doing quite sophisticated stuff right away, and it's working for him.
Yeah, at the Tagus, this is in Spain against the Spanish tribe, right?
Yeah.
I know the one you're talking about. Yeah,
it's in the first year or two of his command.
Yeah. He's clearly a gifted general, even from his earliest fights, the earliest battles. You can see that he clearly understands the necessity of surprise and controlling the battlefield, and that's the hallmark of Hannibal's entire military career: control of the battlefield. And this is why Hannibal is the greatest of all time and not Alexander, because Alexander just had better soldiers than the Persians. He wasn't in control of the battlefield, and I will fight anyone on this.
Yeah, Hannibal does seem like one of those guys where sort of in a battle, tactically speaking, everything he touches turns to gold.
Yes.
So there's other people, even his own brother, Mago, once or twice sort of tries to recreate what Hannibal had done here and there, and just doesn't really work. Like Pyrrhus, you see him doing a thing that's sort of trying to emulate something Alexander did, and it's just not executed well or properly. But Hannibal just has that touch.
Yes, he is genuinely a genius. I don't know how. I mean, like exactly. You say it's like the Midas touch for victory on the field. Everything he does incredibly well. And he. I mean, I can't even. There aren't even any major reverses in all of his time in Italy, are there? There are a couple of small things, but like nothing major. Like Caesar suffers a defeat at Gergovia or somewhere like that. He at least suffers one defeat, and one to the Gauls and one to Pompey, I think it was. But Hannibal suffers absolutely nothing right up until the final battle. But yeah, so yes, very, very, very tactically savvy. But the Romans have made an alliance with a city called Saguntum, haven't they?
Saguntum, yeah, that's the
Yes.
big one. So that's the thing where all the ancient historians all point to Saguntum as being the flashpoint.
Mm.
Because there's the river Ebro, and they'd had a treaty, the Romans and the Carthaginians, that apparently everything north of the Ebro is sort of Roman, the Roman sphere, and
Yep.
everything south should be Carthaginian. And so anyway, Hannibal.
But let's just stop a second. That's that's fucking presumptuous, isn't it? On the part of the Romans, they don't have any territory in Spain. They don't even control the Alps. Like they don't control
Yeah,
anything in in Gaul or. But they're all like, no, you can't go further than the Ebro. It's like why?
like
Go
you
back
say,
to Italy. Like what are you talking about?
it's like you said, the way the Romans do treaties is just
Yes.
really brutal.
Yeah, it's just like we're in charge, and you just have to accept that. And it's like no, and this I can totally see why Hannibal went on what appears to be kind of a moral crusade against these assholes who literally think they own you. They already think they own you. Got nothing in Spain. But you're not allowed to go past this road. Why? Like piss off.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, you can see why it causes resentment, of
oh,
course. Yeah, that's
totally.
a massive overreach.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, yeah.
arrogance.
In fact, the Romans weren't even in complete control of the Po Valley, and that's sort of
Yeah,
their side of the Alps. So,
yeah.
well, yeah, why they want Spain south, anything in Spain south of the Pyrenees is pretty
How they
presumptuous.
think they're entitled to it is mad. But
We get the siege of Saguntum then,
well,
which
yeah, but
yeah,
the
sorry,
thing
go on.
is, it's the warning that the Romans give that probably end up provoking this. Surely, like oh, don't touch anything north of the Po River, the not the Po River, the Ebro. And how's no fuck you? And he just goes and sieges it anyway, doesn't he?
Yeah. So there's a siege there, the
Yeah, and this
siege of
takes
Saguntum.
9 months or something. Oh,
Yeah,
8 months, sorry. Yeah,
in Livy, he goes on and on and on about it for pages and pages and pages.
yeah,
The siege of Saguntum, but eventually Hannibal does get inside, and apparently there's quite a lot of money and loads of stores
yeah.
in Saguntum, which he really needed for what he does next, which is not immediately next, but basically next is
Yeah.
the start of his campaign up into France and then Italy. But at the siege of Saguntum, one of those things later on in the story that, of course, we'll get to is that Hannibal's not very good at or not equipped to do sieges. And yet he does do this siege of Saguntum. And it is a little
Yeah.
bit tricky, but he does get inside. And of course, Saguntum's nothing like Rome on the same scale at all. But still, he is successful in that siege.
Yeah. And what's interesting is afterwards as well, the Romans demand that the Carthaginian Senate give up Hannibal for punishment for attacking one of their allies that they'd shortly signed a treaty with before. And the Carthaginian Senate tell them to go and hang, don't they? And that's where we get the famous being dropped from the folds of the robe, isn't it? Choose peace or war, and with the Roman consul or diplomat, whoever it is, and the Carthaginian Senate say, "You decide."
Yeah.
And he's like, "Will be war." It's like we accept it. It's like, well, why didn't you declare it then?
Yeah, that is a bit of, I've always thought that's a kind of a weird story. Like, am I being
Yeah.
dumb, or it doesn't quite make sense? Like what? I don't really understand the angle that the Carthaginian Senate were going for there.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Because it kind of puts the Carthaginian Senate in the inferior position from the start. They're not even going to take the initiative. They're not going to make the decision. And that's the thing about Hannibal's control of the battlefield is all about his initiative. He always takes the initiative in everything that he does. But back at like Central Command, they don't take the initiative on anything, even the declaration of war. I mean, Hannibal's already sacked Saguntum. The Romans are actually in the right when they say, well, look, we deserve some sort of recompense. We had a treaty with you about this and you broke it, and so they're just like, no, well, we accept your war. It's like why aren't you in the Roman Senate saying fuck Rome, actually?
Yeah. I think maybe it's a case of them just being aloof and it's just a fait accompli. They are already at war. It doesn't really matter who declares what. We're already at war. Or maybe it's that thing where just pure politics, that they don't want to be formally on paper the one that went to war for whatever that's worth, which isn't much, but nevertheless,
it's not even a persuasive story because they are the ones who started it. But or maybe it's just the Romans lying, making up a story they feel best.
Right. Well, way up. Yeah, yeah. I mean,
We
could
don't
be.
know.
It
So
could be.
yeah,
But that thing where, Polybius goes on a bit about how, yeah, the siege of Saguntum was just the final, sort of invading
yeah,
Poland thing.
yeah.
It was. Everyone knew
The
it was going to
build-up of
happen. It was
tensions. Yeah,
inevitable. It sort of already started anyway, really, and that this was just really the final straw. Um,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, the pressure had been building clearly because things were not resolved in the First Punic War.
yeah.
And Carthage's power still was, you know, a threat to Rome's hegemony, frankly, because the Romans essentially approach everything like they're the hegemons of the world. And honestly, I do not begrudge the Carthaginians from attacking first, because you knew the Romans were going to attack as soon as as soon as they could. You
Yeah.
know that they're going to, and then man, the first Punic War. We'll have to do a separate one about the first Punic War because it is really interesting. Um,
Yeah.
you know, the Roman attack on Carthage and how badly that goes is quite hilarious. But anyway, the point is, there's been huge pressure between Carthage and Rome for like 3 generations now.
Yeah.
And so Hannibal gets, what is it, something like 40,000 foot and 12,000 cavalry and 63 elephants, and decides to march up across around the Pyrenees on the Mediterranean seaboard, and then into Gaul, and then to get to the Alps.
Yeah, so, and he does that in winter, which is well, ends up crossing the Alps in sort of November, sort of October, November, December time,
Well, hang on,
which is
before he even gets to
particularly
the Alps,
crazy.
though,
Well, I was just going to say, yeah, there's a battle on the Rhone, isn't
yeah,
there?
he has
Yeah,
to
yeah,
fight
yeah,
just this
yeah.
Gallic tribe because, like, he paid off a bunch of Gallic tribes. You know, he's like, look, I just want to go and fight the Romans.
Yeah, with
I
the
mean,
money he got from Saguntum, yeah.
yeah. He pays off a bunch of people just to not attack him, and but one of them, I guess, I don't know, allied with Rome maybe or something like that. I can't remember why, but they decide to oppose him, don't they? Which
On the Rhone, yeah.
yeah,
I don't think they are allied to Rome in any way. I think they were just sort of
assholes.
this sort of proud, ballsy people that were like, and didn't obviously had no clue what they were up against.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, on the River Rhone, there's a relatively big battle there, it seems. And but
yeah,
Hannibal does one of the things, sort of a signature, not exactly this because he never repeats himself exactly, but
yeah,
a signature move in the sense that he sends some sort of cavalry wing, sort of at night, to hide somewhere so they can come out and win the day in some sort of magical maneuver the next day, surround his enemies.
yes,
And so, yeah, he does that, and they're sort of swept aside, like man versus boys, really,
yeah, yeah, yeah. They've got no chance because Hannibal's army is veteran, and it's in foreign lands and 100% loyal to Hannibal. Um,
Mm,
so it is obvious. It's undoubtedly the most effective army in the entire sort of known world at this point.
mm,
There's going to be no one on earth that has a better army than Hannibal at this point.
mm.
And this is the thing. A lot of just as a quick aside, when talking about like history and warfare, people say, "Oh, who had the best armies? You know, which faction was it? Rome? Was it Greek?" No, it's which individual general had the best army, and at certain points in time. Alexander did not have the best army in the world after he'd come back across the Gogosian desert. You know, like that at that point, his army was ruined. You know, he has to
Yeah,
rebuild.
fair
You know,
point.
yeah, exactly. You know, and the same is, so armies change over time, and but at the point where Hannibal leads his army into France, it's very healthy. It's well fed, well paid, in fighting fit condition, and buoyed by multiple victories under their general, who has grown up in their camps his entire life, is the son of a man that they greatly admired and respected, and has a proven track record for victories and obvious tactical brilliance.
Yeah.
So the morale is going to be very, very high. And I honestly, I'm looking at it like what they have to then go through. Like I say they cross in the winter. You couldn't do it if it was in any other position. If like
Mm.
Hannibal hadn't pulled all these factors together.
Yeah, yeah. I think of perhaps Hannibal's army, at least in the first few years of this, is maybe like a very highly tuned sports car or a race car even, and it only really works very well. When it does work very well, it's almost magical. You can't quite believe your eyes, but everything has to be in a really quite optimal operating window. You know, the tire pressure needs to be right, the tire temperature needs to be right, the angles of the wings need to be just perfect. But if everything is as it should be, then it can perform incredible feats that sort of defy physics. And I feel like, as I say, at least at the beginning, that's what Hannibal's army is. It's right in that sweet operating window of being able to do phenomenal things people hadn't really seen before. But it is finely tuned, as I say. I think I'll probably come back to that. But yeah, so once he wins on the Rhone, he's then faced with the Alps. But just before that, there's a little bit what I think's worth mentioning, is that Rome had sent an army, a consular army, across to Spain at the exact same time that Hannibal is crossing southern France, heading towards the Alps. And the Roman army under Scipio, this is the elder Scipio, not the most famous Scipio, his dad at this point, he lands in at Marseille, what is later Marseille, and his sort of scouts meet or realise that there's Carthaginian scouts there. And so Hannibal, this tactic of Hannibal's to get across the Alps in winter and smash down into Italy completely, no one saw it coming. That whole thing might be compromised now. The Romans have seen him coming, but he gets lucky though, because Scipio decides to just carry on, doesn't really take the intelligence properly.
Well, that's the thing. Like, I don't think that Scipio the Elder was expecting. I mean, he was expecting to be across the Pyrenees. But Hannibal travels really quickly and definitely catches them by surprise. And yeah, like you say, he just carries on, goes past him, doesn't he, after a cavalry skirmish?
Yeah, I think he splits his force and sends some back, but mainly just carries on to his post somewhere in northern Spain.
Yeah.
But historians have said, if Scipio had realised and gone back to mainland Italy, the next few years might have played out a bit differently, but anyway.
I think that if Scipio had realised and turned around and tried to engage Hannibal, Hannibal would have just crushed him.
Oh, what, right there in southern France?
Yeah, I think
quite possibly. Yeah.
I mean, his army's at its highest strength that it'll ever be. Really, Hannibal's fresh. They're just gonna nuke him. Absolutely confident.
There's actually two Scipio brothers of the elder Scipio. He's got a brother, Gnaeus. Gnaeus, however you pronounce that, who's also has consular armies. So at various points, there's the two Scipio brothers, or Scipii, if you like, and I think it's the uncle or the brother, Gnaeus, who at this point as well actually captures Hanno in Spain. But I mean, that's just an aside. The important thing in 218 is Hannibal's crossing of the Alps.
Yeah. Well, while Hannibal is absent from Spain, the Romans are attacking Carthaginian holdings in Spain, and they don't do a very good job either, because one of the two brothers was in New Carthage with like half the 10,000 men, and then the other was in North Spain with their holdings with another 10,000 men, and the Romans could just defeat them in detail, which is what they did.
Yeah,
I mean, it wasn't an easy campaign actually. I'm not trying to understate how difficult it was, because it's not like the Carthaginians didn't fight it well, but it wasn't very well managed. I didn't know.
Yeah, there's some anecdote I thought was quite interesting. In Saguntum, the Carthaginians have taken lots of noble families' children hostage from the surrounding region to sort of keep them cowed, I suppose. And the Romans at some point bribe someone, or they get their hands on these children, and they give them back to all the surrounding tribes. And apparently that flips a lot of them over to being loyal to Rome. But yeah, this whole period, because this war doesn't end until 202, so it's 16 years long, and particularly in the Spanish theatre, it's very back and forth. It's very difficult to sort of keep a track on exactly who controls what when. I think of it exists in my mind as a bit of a mess. I mean, I know the dates of the big battles, and the sort of generalized narrative of what's going on when. But I think to get a really, really in-depth understanding of it, you'd have to study it for intensely for a while.
Yeah, yeah, but as you say, it's just messy. It's just
Mm.
messy, and there are constant like advantages and reversals for both sides until Scipio Africanus comes along and finally takes New Carthage. But again, we're getting ahead there.
Yeah, that's a little ahead.
Yeah,
So
way ahead.
the great episode of Hannibal and his elephants crossing the Alps. One thing I'd want to say about that straight off the bat is it's always said, or quite often said, like what an incredible feat it is, what a wondrous, unique, incredible, which it is. I wouldn't deny
Yeah,
that. But I personally, this is just my personal opinion, but I would put some caveats on it. I mean, you don't need a pickaxe or crampons to walk across the Alps. The higher peaks aren't that difficult. I've read lots of accounts of in the Grand Tour of people just getting carried across on sedan chairs. It's not it's not that intense. To do it in winter is something else though. And
yes.
the elephants, the elephants that is quite a thing. I mean, their ankles don't really articulate very well, do they?
Yeah, I mean, like you say, like one guy traveling across or a small team, yeah, that's quite doable, even in the winter.
But just
Like,
just normal armies without elephants at least have been crossing the Alps for hundreds of years on just doing it a lot. So just wanted to say that.
yeah,
Sorry, go on.
they have now, but in Hannibal's day, it probably wasn't as common and as well trodden as in the next 2,200 years, right?
Mm.
So, like in the same way that if we go to Thermopylae now, it's a giant open plain, whereas back when the Greeks were defending it, it's like 50 meters wide or something like that.
Mm.
The terrain changes, and so I doubt that the paths through the Alps were nearly as well worn and secure as they came to be in late centuries. And especially as the fact that Hannibal, for some reason, well, not for some reason, obviously for looking at right pickings, was being attacked by various tribes who lived in the Alps. So,
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the other things about the passing of the Alps by Hannibal is that one, it's just an incredible sort of logistical feat, or just physically. But one of the things that I think gets skated over a bit is the attrition. Like basically half his army and most of the elephants died, didn't they?
so yeah. I mean,
Like half
how
the
many
army.
elephants did
That's
he?
incredible.
How many elephants did he arrive with? Well, a lot of the attrition will be desertions.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So as you said, they were also sort of harried along the way by the hill peoples,
Yes.
by the mountain peoples. And there's one particular bit I'm sure you know about where they're walking through it at some sort of defile or some sort of valley, and they get ambushed in the front and back, and then get rained down on by loads of guys up top, raining boulders and stones down on them, and loads of them get killed. I mean, thousands of guys. So it must have been, that alone must have been something really horrific.
Totally. I mean, like it's only thank God to Hannibal's good sense that he put heavy infantry at the rear of the army, so they weren't destroyed. Because I mean, if they'd been free to just tear up through the army from the rear, then the whole thing would have been gone. They would have been killed. But yeah, like you say, it's like this huge defile where they've got prepared loads of rocks, and this is obviously not the first time this has been done. You know what I mean? Like this is clearly some sort of trap that this tribe has used before. But yeah, it's a horrific journey, and then you've got people freezing, and there are accounts of doesn't an elephant fall off a cliff or something at one point?
Yeah, I think more than one elephant falls into crevasses and things. Apparently, I mean, the image of it, it's almost comical in a macabre way.
Well, yeah, but it's very much like 1950s adventure sort of movie, where you just got like you can just picture them just clinging to the sides of some fucking narrow like course going along the sides of a cliff or something. You think, shit, and then it's icy, and you've got the natives. You're freezing cold, you're constantly climbing mountain all day. You're traveling up and down difficult terrain all day. And they do this for weeks, don't they?
Yeah, it takes weeks, yeah.
Yeah. So it's just I mean, I'm not like a lot of people leave and just go home, but a lot of people die. And so Hannibal arrives finally at the sort of like the other side of the Alps with something like 20,000 men left and like 6,000 cavalry. I mean, you're getting like he's trying to take 12,000 horses across through there, Like,
Man, I mean, really think about that.
yeah,
12,000 horses. I mean, I think
such a
maybe
large number.
maybe at a horse racing event or a fete or something, I've seen 20 horses in one place at one time, and you think, oh, that's quite a lot, quite impressive. 12,000 horses, like it's mad, isn't it?
But then you've got to bring food for 12,000 horses
The
as well.
fodder, yeah.
So the baggage train, and not just that, you've got every day your 40,000 or 50,000 men need 3 meals a day. You've got to make sure you've got that with you for weeks. And it's like, man, it's such a logistical and endurance challenge that it's a genuine miracle. And it says a lot about Hannibal's knowledge of how to manage armies, that this is even possible. Because I'm sure that I've got no doubt that people in Rome, I mean, they were completely surprised to find Hannibal across the Alps that quickly in winter. But they must have just thought, well, this is safe. He's not going to cross the Alps in winter. That would be stupid. You're going to lose tens of thousands of men. Nobody's going to do that. And then pop Hannibal's there in the Po Valley saying, hey, Gauls, let's go beat up the Romans.
Yeah, they would not have expected it. I mean, I think it's not like it's stupid. It's just not even. It's not possible.
Yeah.
It's like the impenetrable Ardennes. You cannot get tank divisions through that forest. It's not a possible thing. So don't worry about it. It's like leading an army through the Alps in winter. Yeah, that's just not on the cards.
We're not going to expect that.
Yeah. But it's one of those things when you come down out of the Alps. Apparently, I can a lot of accounts from the Grand Tour that you come down into the Po Valley, which even in winter is going to be a great respite from the higher peaks, and you're going to be able to, again, even in winter, probably be able to get fodder and forage. It's going to be a lot easier. So it's that feeling again that when you come down out of the mountains and into sort of pasture land, that you've sort of made it. But of course, they're deep behind enemy lines. Essentially, they've not made it. They've survived that episode, but it's like their travails have only just begun.
Yeah, now they're going to have to really give the Romans hell because they're in newly conquered Roman territory. So yeah, this is the invasion's on. Yeah, that's precisely what Hannibal does, though, isn't it? The first thing he wants to do is find the Romans, beat them, and show the Gauls, look, we mean business, because he desperately needs more men.
Yeah, his whole thing is trying to have engagements. The bigger, the better. The more decisive, or potentially the more decisive, the better, as far as he's concerned. So his sort of war aims are to just try and meet them in battle if he can, to goad them out.
Yeah,
if necessary.
which is actually really easy because the Romans are so arrogant and so full of themselves that they can't stop themselves from engaging in open conflict.
Well, the first thing that comes up is straight away there's a small army there at the river Ticinus, and that's right up there, almost in the foothills of the Alps, really. And Scipio the elder is there, and his son Scipio the younger, both Publius Cornelius Scipios, and they're there, and they don't really count the Battle of the Ticinus as one of the big ones, but it's still a full battle. I wouldn't call it a skirmish. I'd call it a battle.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if you've got the numbers in front of you, but I mean, the Romans are relatively weak. It's like they're aware that Hannibal now has an army in Italy. They're like, well, let's just send. Again, they don't really know what they're up against yet. Yeah. Let's just send an army against him, because why not? Let's at least do that if we can. That's their thinking at this stage.
Yeah. One of the things we missed out on in the crossing of the Alps, and I love this story, was the when they find that the way is blocked by a rock fall.
Ah, yes.
I can't believe I forgot this one, because this is my favorite story.
So the barbarians do something or other, don't they? And loads of boulders fall down to physically block their way.
Yeah, and they're like, well, Christ, we're stuck. Well, not, they didn't say Christ, but so it looks like they're stuck. And apparently Hannibal gets them to put flammable materials like bales of hay or whatever underneath the rock, drench it in wine, vinegar wine or something like that, and then light fire to the bales, and it cracks the rocks open so they can remove them, and so the army can continue through. And I'm just like, that's amazing. Like, how the hell did he know how to do that? Like, when
shades of MacGyver.
Shades of MacGyver.
Yeah, and you never watched MacGyver from the 80s?
No, no, I
You never
haven't.
watched MacGyver? Oh, sorry, you won't know the reference. It's just
No,
this
I won't.
guy that did sort of A-team style, a little bit of chemistry and a
Yeah,
little
yeah,
bit of do-it-yourself stuff to get out of tight situations.
yeah.
But anyway, sorry, carry on.
But I just thought it was amazing. That goes to show
Yeah.
that there is some kind of engineering knowledge, in the institution of the Carthaginian army here. It gives you they're very versatile and they're good at solving problems.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. I mean, that's again one of their hallmarks
yeah,
is that like their AI has been turned up to the top. They seem to that they're not outfoxed or outwitted very often at all. They sort of see it coming. They seem to be savvy. A lot of the commanders seem to be very accomplished in their own right. I mean, Massinissa, Gisco is
yeah,
another one that's known, completely in his own right to be very capable. But yeah, so at the Ticinus, the Carthaginians are successful, and Scipio the Elder is actually wounded. The Romans in this era
yeah,
seem to have quite an unsophisticated sort of tactical view. They have quite often just a big chunk of heavily armed legionaries
yeah.
that push forward sort of irresistibly. But not much else. Some cavalry on the wings, but nothing really beyond that, not significantly tactically.
No,
And
no,
so
I saw that.
that's what they do at the Ticinus, and it doesn't work.
Well,
And
this is
Scipio himself is wounded. Sorry.
yeah, yeah. Before you go on from that point, because that's a really great point. Because I think there is a kind of morale bonus. Because I think one thing that people will need to remember is that like most the battles were won or lost by who was prepared to stay. Um, and this is something that after Athens becomes a democracy, I think I can't remember who it is, Thucydides or someone like that, or Herodotus, whoever it was. I was reading a long time ago. They comment on how the Athenian armies were not superior to their contemporaries until Athens became a democracy, because then each man felt like he was fighting for himself, fighting for his own freedom. And so suddenly Athens, upon declaring it's a democracy, it gets invaded by three different armies and it smashes each one of them. They're really, really confident. And it's because they are just piling into the enemy harder than the enemy piles into them.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot, because everyone's got these big shields, they're wearing armor, they're wearing helmets, they've got swords and spears that they stab them. So a lot of it probably did come down to something like a rugby scrum, and it would have been very, very brutal and aggressive. And forward momentum, I think, was a big influence on who won the battle. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why the Macedonian phalanx was such a powerful thing, because it could generate a lot of forward momentum of just these guys walking forward, stabbing at meters away targets. And this hedge of pikes is just like a Roman, like Mummius, I think it was called it, the
Yeah.
scariest thing you'd ever seen. But the Romans seem to have mastered this kind of aggressive style, and I think it being a republic probably has that kind of effect. But they very much, as I say, they just barrel into things and then just push through really firmly, and they're really good at it. you know
Yeah. I mean, you need the violence, speed, and momentum. I mean,
Total confidence, though.
the
That's the thing.
momentum is the key thing. Yeah, I mean, most times that's plenty to win a battle. If the other side are doing a very similar thing to you, and you're simply better at doing that than
Yeah,
them, then that's the game, and you can
yeah.
steamroller nearly anyone.
And
But as I
that's
say, no
why the
one's really.
Spartans could repeatedly defeat the Athenians. The Athenians, if they'd had like a single tactician among them, they'd probably been able to defeat the Spartans. But they just lined up for their hoplite ranks and then just pushed each other. And it's like, okay, but the Spartans do that all day, every day, And it's
Yeah.
the same thing with the Romans. They, like you say, they're just better at doing that one thing. But sorry, Karen.
Well, no, I was just going to say, it seems that no one's ever seen the like of Hannibal's skill before.
No.
So you can forgive the Romans, at least the first couple, for just doing what they've always done.
Yeah.
Generals are usually conservative with a small c, aren't they? I mean, and you
Yeah.
can't really blame them. When men's lives are on the
There's a lot
line,
at
it's got to be
stake.
ballsy to do something out of left field. But yeah, so I mean, at the Ticinus it doesn't work, and Scipio himself is wounded, and one of the nice little stories is that his son, also Scipio, who becomes
Yeah.
really important, was perhaps meant to have saved his father, literally shielded
Yeah.
him and dragged him off the field.
I think that the other version where a slave saves him is more likely.
Yeah, I heard a slave woman even possibly. Of well,
Oh,
I'm
really?
making that
Slave
up in
woman.
my mind. I'm not sure, but
I only heard that just a slave, I assume a male slave, saves him, which I think is more likely than, his son, who presumably would have been in the front lines fighting heroically. Uh, you know, but the narrative, the story, who knows what difference it make. But yeah, it's Scipio Africanus, who apparently is alleged to have whisked his father away, badly wounded.
yeah, yeah.
But don't believe it though.
From the Romans' point of view, it's on.
Yes.
The pressure is on them. Hannibal is inside Italy. He's pushed back the first sort of vanguard, if you like, that the Romans have tried, and he's now up there. And so the Romans are taken aback even at this stage. They're like, oh, well, you can imagine, like,
Well, so
oh my God,
the
what
Gauls.
the hell?
So are the Gauls at this point, and Hannibal basically doubles the size of his army with Gallic recruits.
Oh yeah, because a lot of people up there are like, "What? We can thumb the Romans in the eye. I'm on board. Yes, please. Yes,
Well,
please."
they'd recently been conquered by the Romans.
Yeah,
Like the Romans have only just turned up in the Gallic imagination, really, and so suddenly, they've been beasted around for like 20 years by the Romans, but then suddenly this amazing Carthaginian commander just appears from over the Alps and is like, "I'm here to defeat the Romans, and I don't want anything in return. All I want you to do is come with me, and we'll sack Rome." It's like, okay, can you beat them? Smash, yes. Well then, yeah, and so yeah, he ends up recruiting, and like there it's not just recruiting as well. Like he goes to capture a Roman grain depot, and the depot just defect to him, because they're like Roman levies from somewhere in South Italy, and they're like, yeah, fuck it.
Well, one thing I wanted to mention a little earlier, perhaps, but now's a good point. Is Brennus, obviously a Gaul,
Celtic word for presumably king.
But the Brennus invasion is much earlier, isn't it? We're talking like 390. Yeah. So if you can imagine it, that exists in the mind of the Romans from the age of Hannibal, Brennus would exist in their imagination as something like a Napoleon figure, a year older age, a couple of hundred years ago. So it exists in their popular consciousness as. But because if people don't know, Brennus did get all the way to Rome and sack it. It's like this really early trauma that the Romans had, that they were really defeated and humiliated and almost annihilated by Brennus, and that they don't want that to, it's happened to them once. They don't want it to happen again.
And yeah, this is undoubtedly the source of the Roman pride and arrogance when it comes to never bending the knee, because essentially with Brennus they had to pay the Gauls to leave. They in the citadel in Rome, they'd managed to haul up, and so the Gauls couldn't get in, but they could occupy the wider city, and so they had to pay them all this gold to leave. And they complained, "Oh, you're not using fair weights." And then Brennus throws his sword on the scales and says, "Woe to the conquered," and they have to pay. And it's that humiliation that fuels everything, all Roman foreign policy from that point onwards, I think.
Yeah, it seems to burn in their character.
Absolutely. How dare you do this to us? And so, it's kind of like the world isn't fair to us, so we're not going to be fair to the world. And that, but genuinely, that's what they're like.
Yeah, we've been hurt.
Yeah, no, it is. It is. I think it's this kind of, it's given them this kind of fear and insecurity that is the impetus to do everything that they do and to never bend the knee again. So
yeah, and that you can only imagine they're like, well, this Hannibal chap he's a new Brennus. If he can, he will do to us what Brennus did, or worse, possibly. So, I mean, by the time of the Ticinus, they're on full alert mode, full panic mode almost.
Oh yeah.
So they react to it, of course, and they get together a decent army, a proper double consular army, and head up to try and deal with it as more or less as soon as they can. It's still in the year 218. And the armies end up meeting near the Lake Trebia.
Yeah, and it's was it Sempronius Longus?
Yeah, Longus and Scipio, I think, isn't it? Longus and Scipio.
Yeah, Scipio. I think Scipio's.
Longus and Scipio the elder. And one is that Longus seems to have been a hothead. Well, this plays out so many times, doesn't it? That one of the of the consuls is really conservative, and the other one's just a hothead who can't wait to get into battle.
And Rome produces a lot of hothead generals like this, but this is what I was talking about with the sort of like the upward momentum from being a republic or being a democracy. If there's no king at the top, then the top spot's open to whoever can take it, and so it produces a lot of competitiveness. And it's repeatedly in Roman history we see over and over and over glory-seeking, ambition-laden young men, young aristocrats who want commands that they aren't really old enough to take, but end up getting it through, corrupt means and, like nepotistic means. And I mean, like sometimes they do well, like in the case of Pompey until the Civil War, and other times they get crushed. But in the case of, now with Hannibal. But it is interesting how it's a consistent pattern of like man who arrives at the top in Rome.
Yeah, Longus is more, ready to rock and roll.
Yes.
Well, so here's the thing about that. Actually, the dynamic of what's expected of you as well. So, one thing that springs to mind is the British Navy captains of sort of the 18th century, 19th century sort of hornblower times. They were insanely aggressive.
Yes.
But they had to be, like, you'd get court-martialed and stuff if you weren't insanely aggressive. If you saw like a small glimmer of a chance to attack and didn't, that's terrible. Yeah. So one way of reading that is that's really quite aggressive. And I think the Roman generals for hundreds of years, it wasn't sort of written in stone like that, but you were expected to go after it. It was really not really done to bide your time and be very cautious and careful. Although it was
very confident and hot-headed. They knew they had better troops. They were very warlike, and there's spoils in it. They want the fruits of victory.
Yeah, and the other thing, of course, is as a consul, you've got 1 year.
Yes.
And so if your ultimate goal is to win glory for your family, to get a triumph for your family, that's the ultimate thing. Then you've got a year to do it. And if you're in your 11th month, say, of command, and you might really force the issue to your own detriment in order to try and have a battle.
And this happens many times throughout Roman history as well.
Yeah. Well, so anyway, at Trebia, the army goes up there, and it's cold. It's all snowy still. They're in a sort of a snowy plain. And
this takes place in December as well, the 22nd or 23rd of December in 218 BC, and it's still right in up in the Po Valley. It's still really fun. Hannibal's not made much progress out of the Alps at this point, really.
Yeah, there's like a snowdrift, and the river is, I think, sort of half frozen over, or certainly freezing. And there's sort of a blizzard or something the night before. So it's one of those things. This plays out a few times. If you can sort of one way or another force your enemy to not get much or any sleep the night before, and certainly not have any breakfast, that's quite a big advantage to you, isn't it? If you can do that, and your guys have been well rested and fed, that's sort of almost a game changer. It's a big thing to do if you can, and Hannibal does that to the Romans in this one, doesn't he?
Hannibal does this to everyone. Hannibal's entire mode of warfare is psychological. In Harold Lamb's book, there was a point where later on in the campaign, where a new Roman general takes over whatever army, and what Hannibal asks specifically is, what is the man like? What is his character? How does he respond to things? What's he likely to do? And Hannibal gets in the minds of his opponents and takes full advantage of that, and he just stacks the deck in his favor wherever he can, and he's incredibly efficient about this. And this is a great example of that, like you're obviously alluding to there. Because for anyone who doesn't know, the Roman and Carthaginian armies are fairly evenly matched at about 40, 50,000 men, something like that, on either side. And so it's going to be a big, decisive set-piece battle. And Hannibal gets his men up early, gets them fed and out into the field really, really early. And so the Romans respond to this. Again, Hannibal taking the initiative. The Romans respond to this by forcing their men out of bed before they're ready, without having breakfast, and then march them through the Trebia River, which must have been freezing cold. Which, I mean, it just sounds like a dumb idea when you think about it.
I mean,
And so,
deathly cold, right? You could die from that, or go into shock and
yeah,
stuff. Like, it's mad, yeah.
I mean, it's the middle of winter. I mean, I realize it's Italy, so sure, it's not going to be as cold as if you're in Scotland or something, but like, still, it can't have been pleasant, and it can't have helped their fighting fitness to be half soaked, up to the waist or up to the chest with freezing cold water they've got to stand around in all day now.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, they then engage, but Hannibal has also hidden a detachment of horsemen, hasn't he?
Yeah, I think it's his brother Mago. That's another thing he does fairly often, is that he'll have a detachment, usually cavalry, but not always, some sort of detachment hidden, and at the decisive moment, it comes out and surrounds someone or takes their wing or something like that, and it'll win the day. It'll be the decisive move, and that's what he does here. It's one of his just a classic example, a signature move. To have Mago come out of the hills or out of the undergrowth, whatever it was. But it's another thing actually which plays out again, and like sort of a classic thing. Lots of things that happen at the Trebia, I feel like, play out again. And one of them is that even though the Romans get defeated in this battle, sort of absolutely, and that they get surrounded essentially, the actual main body, the main sort of the main kernel of their infantry force moving forward, it does move forward and isn't stopped, and eventually goes off the field entirely to save itself. It never doesn't turn around, can't do that, but it isn't actually stopped dead and annihilated to a man, like happens later, which we'll get into. So
this is very interesting stuff.
It's good at that. It really is good at that.
It's amazing at that, and it's clearly the best at that. But what's really interesting is how aggressive Longus is, because I mean, like the Carthaginian and the Roman armies are like, I don't know, something like 3 miles apart, and so he marches them across the river in these 2 columns. Hannibal doesn't attack them or anything like this, so they've marched through this frozen river 3 miles, up a slight incline towards Hannibal's position, and then just got to engaging, just like full on frontal attack. This is where the other cavalry comes in, and like the Roman cavalry is driven off, as it always is, and the cavalry wings then turn on the body of the Roman infantry. But like you say, the sort of mailed fist blow of the center of the Roman infantry is very, very powerful, and it breaks apart the Carthaginian line and then passes through it, and about 10,000 of them escape. But this is interesting because Hannibal clearly learns from this. As we'll see when we come on to Canna in a bit, Hannibal has clearly adapted his tactics in order to deal with the Romans' primary strength and turn it into a weakness. This is why Hannibal is the greatest, and Alexander just inherited a decent army. Stand by it. No, I'm joking. Alexander was great. I'm just joking. But,
Hannibal certainly learns, doesn't he?
Yes.
It doesn't sound like you're asking too much of a general to learn. But he does. And it sets him apart.
He's an expert on the Romans. He learns everything he can about the Romans as he's fighting them and before he fights them. But yeah, so after, I mean, like it's still an absolute massacre for the Romans, because they turn up with 40,000 men and 10,000 get away. So they must lose like 20,000 men, something like that.
Yeah, it's an L in their column for sure. No question about that, because Hannibal is free to move on and continue on down into Italy after Trebia, and you can imagine the Roman.
I just looked it up on Wikipedia. A bunch of historians, peg it about 20,000 killed during the battle. So like, it's still a colossal defeat for the Romans.
Oh yeah.
Like, that's not good. Losing 20,000 men in a day. 40,000 men, that's bad,
Yeah,
and then another 10,000 captured or whatever,
Yeah, it would have been a terrible scene.
Yes.
of butchery. But you can imagine the Roman reaction to that would have been, what the fuck? Who is this guy? Who is this dude? Like, what the hell? We got two proper consular armies this time. It wasn't a little skirmish. It wasn't a first attempt. This was us giving it a real proper good go, and we got smashed in. Oh dear. Like what are we going to do essentially? Like what's our next move?
It shows them that they're really against someone who is clearly an expert at what they do. You know.
Yeah, they recognise that, don't they? Quite quickly.
Not quickly enough, it seems.
Well, right. Well, I mean, one of Hannibal's main problems is food and logistics and being able to feed all the men and the animals, because he hasn't got any supply lines directly coming from Spain, of course. So that's part of his headache, perhaps more than Roman armies, really. Part of his headache is to be able to forage. So nearly everything he does is take for years. Because if people don't know, he's in Italy for years now. Well, until the end, 15 years. Odd. And a lot of what it is him just trying to have enough food and to just make the logistics of it all work. And that starts straight away. So he decides he has to. He makes the decision. How is he going to move down into Italy? Which side of the Apennines is he going to do, and which specific roads? There's not that many roads in Italy, even to this day. There's a few specific highways that you have to take between the mountains if you're going down through Italy. There's not that many, and in the ancient world there's even fewer. So the Romans knew that there was really 2 or 3 ways that Hannibal could lead his army down into central Italy. So they sort of try to stop him or bar the way, or at least have scouts out there to see what's going on. And they don't see him, and it's one of his master strokes, tactical master strokes, to move through the marshes around Arretium. This again, it's like one of those bits of a terrain that's supposed to be impassable, like the Ardennes or something, and yet he does lead his army through it.
Yes. Because across the Apennines, isn't it, and then through the marshes.
Yeah, it's down in that valley, I believe, where modern day Florence is.
Yes.
Florence is quite ancient, but I don't think there was any Florence. There was no Florence then, but it's that valley that it's in. I've actually been there. It's a lovely bowl-shaped valley, really beautiful. Well, it is nowadays anyway. But then it was marshland, really bad marshland. I think it was still being drained even in sort of Mussolini's day.
Really?
So, I mean, it's mostly drained by then. During the medieval period, it was already mostly drained. But anyway, in the 200s BC, it was just impenetrable marshland. But he leads his army through there to sort of outflank the Romans, and it works. There's only one elephant left by this point.
The Hannibal rides.
Yeah, that he's supposed to ride. That is supposed to. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, it's sort of a great image. Although it doesn't prevent him getting an eye infection.
Well, this is how he loses an eye, isn't it?
Yeah.
And this is another thing as well. Like Hannibal suffers everything that his men are suffering, and this is often pointed to by historians as being one of the reasons that his army is so loyal, and that the mission that he's on is something that they will also go along with. I mean, by the end of it, he's a one-eyed, grizzled veteran who must have just looked, and he's, he in all of it, like in Cannae, the Battle of Cannae, and doubtless at the other battles, especially at the first one. I can't remember the river's name, not the Trebia, the one before. He's fighting personally in the front lines. Like,
yeah. Oh God, yeah. Sorry.
And so by the end of this, he must have just been an absolute nightmare to look at.
Yeah, well, I would have thought so. Yeah, Hannibal's definitely the par excellence example of a commander who's on the front line stabbing people himself.
Yes.
And potentially getting killed. In the Alexander sort of Menelaus mold.
Yeah, in the heroic tradition.
Yeah, and I was saying to somebody a week or two ago that I'm going to do a thing about Hannibal. Ask me anything, and they said, "Oh, how did he lose his eye?" And I told the story. He just got some dirty water in his eye from
Yeah.
crossing a marsh, and it got infected. And of course, there's no antibiotics. He got infected, and he lost the sight in that eye. And they were a bit disappointed. It's not that cool or glorious of a way to lose your sight, is it?
Well, I don't know, man. There's something that speaks to the kind of grueling, heroic determination that must have been present. You know, what happened? Well, he was evading a bunch of Roman armies to get a good position on another Roman army in order to destroy it. And it forced him to march his entire army through this swamp. And, you know, it was so dangerous, you know, and infectious and gross. He ends up losing this eye, even while on the back of an elephant while doing it. I mean, there is something like, you know, impactful about it, I think.
Yeah, no, it's still quite cool. It's just like it's not like he lost it climbing a wall, being first up a wall, and over the
Sure,
wall.
but
It's not
like,
as cool as that, but yeah, no, it's still pretty.
he's making sacrifices for tactical necessity. That's the thing.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
I mean, like you say, he crosses the Apennines through this unguarded and difficult route. In the Harold Land book I was reading, he was saying how the Gauls weren't used to forced marching, whereas the Carthaginians were, and so the Gauls were like grumbling and like, you know, struggling to keep up with the Carthaginian forces, which were, you know, not Carthaginian, but never mind. But yeah, so yeah, they outmaneuver the Romans by going across a mountain range and then through a fucking swamp. And then we get to the ambush, don't we? Yeah, the generously titled Battle of Lake Trasimene. It's generously titled a battle because it's not really. It's an ambush. In fact, I think it might actually be the largest ambush in history, where Hannibal surprises an entire Roman army and annihilates it.
For me, this is one of my I think probably my favorite episode of the whole Hannibal story. I've not actually ever been to Lake Trasimene. I don't know if you have. I've not been there, but I've been to various lakes around Italy, and they're beautiful, aren't they? And quite often when I've been there, I've sort of imagined, oh, that looks like the path I imagine the Battle at Lake Trasimene might have looked like, you know, with a hillside, a forested hillside. But I mean, to get into some of the detail of it. So we mentioned that, well, the Romans don't. It's their move. They don't know what to do. Hannibal is doing all sorts of crazy things they don't expect, and inside Italy. So they decide that. Well, one of the things they do is, as most people probably know, the Romans have 2 consuls every year. That the head of the state is 2 men. Now, the dynamic of that, having 2 men in control, isn't ideal, is it? Certainly if they're not completely on the same page. And this is what happens at Trasimene. They've got one of them is Fabius, who comes into it. We'll talk all about Fabius in a minute. And the other one is Flaminius Servilius. And he's the guy that gets himself and an army chopped up at Lake Trasimene.
Yeah, well, tell us about Flaminius then.
Well, yeah, so again, it's this dynamic of one of the consuls or one of the generals is sort of conservative or wants to take things carefully, and the other one's a hothead who just do anything to get at them. And that's what this Flaminius is sort of famed for, or is infamous for, perhaps. And so, yeah, there's Lake Trasimene, and the story goes that he leads his army around the edge of this lake, and on one side of them is this massive lake, and on the other side is quite a steep hillside, densely forested hillside, with this small road, and he leads them down there. And at the far end of it, and the whole Roman army is strung out in a long, thin line along this path. And when they get to the far end, they're met by a Carthaginian contingent. So they line up for battle as best they can and start having a skirmish there. And the Romans are doing well what they do, pushing forward. You know, they can do that. They're good at that. But the masterstroke is that sort of out of nowhere, it's the morning. It's meant to be really misty.
Yeah.
There's a heavy mist about the place. And coming crashing down out of the hillside to their flank comes the majority of Hannibal's army, catching them unawares and just ambushing them perfectly. And it's one of a few examples where Hannibal is said to have performed a masterstroke there. Really, it's, as you say, possibly one of the greatest ambushes of all time. I think it is studied in Sandhurst and West Point and places.
Absolutely. I mean, like Hannibal has the advantage anyway, because he's swelled his army after Trebia with a bunch of Gallic recruits. So he's got a much bigger army than Flaminius. He only has like 30,000 men. He's got like a single consular army, isn't he? But yeah, like the all along the lake of Trasimene, there's this hill. I'm looking at a picture of it now. Actually, I don't know. It doesn't look that steep, but maybe it was steeper in their time. But I mean, it's a very significant incline, probably like 35% up or something. But at the top, there's this ridge, and apparently that's where Hannibal's army was all hidden. And so they ran down. It looks like I don't know, maybe half a mile or something. But they have to come down. But yeah, it doubtless in Hannibal's day was heavily forested. It's not. It looks very not. It's forested, but it looks. I don't know. Maybe no. Yeah, I mean, I guess it still is heavily forested actually. So yeah, just coming out of this tree line towards the Romans walking along the edge of the lake.
Yeah, that's what the accounts that Polybius and Livy, anyway, they describe it as heavily wooded, because one of the things that makes it such a masterstroke is that Hannibal needed to. He didn't just march his men up that slope and then in like the night before and wait there, because apparently that would have been really obvious. The Romans would have seen that. Yeah, a whole army has been through here, and oh look, they've quite obviously walked up this hillside. So what Hannibal did was march them a really long forced march through the night in silence, more or less, it seems, to up and around, along all the way around, to get up on this ridge without leaving any footprints. And so again, that is a sign of having complete mastery of men and of maneuvering. There's no way he wasn't a master of it, you know.
Yeah, I mean, like the fact that, as you say, you can't march like 50, however many thousand men up this hill. They obviously, like you say, it looks like an army's been through there. And so he goes this long, circuitous route that, as I say, he force marches his men through the night to get the perfect position. And you can see from if you go look at a picture of like Lake Trasimene now, you can see pictures of where the battle took place. And yeah, it is covered in forest, and so he would have had a few hundred meters to have to cover to get from the edge of the forest to the lake. And if it's in first thing in the morning, mists on the lake, it's still everyone's still kind of just getting their bearings and stuff. You can see how this would have been such a shocking thing to have happened to you. It's truly amazing, and like the impact of his army just coming down. The Romans they don't last, do they?
Oh well, no, not at all. I mean, it's another pure win for the Carthaginians, and that Carthaginian army must have been sitting there perfectly silently, and they've all been able to have moved at one correctly on command.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where it could very easily go wrong. Only a tiny thing needs to go wrong.
Yeah.
But it all works perfectly for him. Like we say, he has that Midas touch.
Yeah.
Another commander might have attempted that, and for one reason or another, it didn't work. But one funny thing I've heard people say is that certainly in this period, that what the Romans are not good at categorically is scouts. Like, do they have zero scouts? I mean, really, like how? Because this is just one example of where Hannibal's able to do this sort of thing. And if you just had like a cloud of scouts out around your camp or around your army, the Romans wouldn't have been caught out and humiliated and defeated as often as they were. And this is the example where,
which Hannibal had, incidentally. Hannibal did exactly that.
Yeah. Well, he's no chump, he's a professional. He knows what he's doing. And it seems like this Flaminius was a bit of a chump.
Yeah, I mean, Hannibal throughout the entire campaign has scouting parties making sure that he knows where the Romans are at all times. And obviously, you have to do that sort of stuff. You would think, but I guess the Romans were too used to fighting foes that just wanted straight up battles. Like, because you've got this kind of honor culture that's going on in the Mediterranean at the time, where it's the desire is to and this is part of how the Romans end up suffering tremendous defeats, is the honor culture under which they operate, where a coward refuses battle. We're not cowards, therefore we shall go forward as quickly into battle as possible and just hack them to death with our swords, because that's what heroes do. So, okay, that is what heroes do. It's also what foolhardy idiots do when confronted with a genius, because he knows that's what you think. And this is how we end up coming along to the next battle. But I guess I'll allow you to take us there. I don't want to jump ahead.
Yeah, well, there's a tiny bit more to Trasimene. I mean, again, just like at Trebia, the guys at the very front do actually push through. The very, very few survivors are guys at the very front that actually did push through. They did their job and were able to survive. But basically, all of it, including the consul Flaminius himself, are killed there. And
even that 6,000 Romans were captured by Hannibal.
Right, yeah. Well, the story goes, isn't it, that the ones that weren't cut up ran into the lake to try and live or survive for a few minutes longer. And in the ancient world, actually, it's one of these things. We're used to the idea that most people can swim. It's just a rite of passage, like learning to ride a bike. A little kid, you teach them to swim. Most people can swim. A bit weird.
Probably you've got a swimming pool near your house.
Right, yeah. In the ancient world, that's not the case. It was quite rare to be able to swim. Most normal people weren't taught to swim at all. A lot of men, thousands, sort of wade into the lake just to, as I say, try and survive for a bit longer. But they can't swim out or anything, and so they're sort of stranded there. It's a really pathetic image.
Yeah, I mean, you're right about the swimming thing, by the way. Like these sort of Greek ethnographers will note when. The young men of the village dive into the pool to dive into the sea and collect shells from the bottom or something. They'll tell you if that's something that tribe does. It's not normal.
Yeah, it's rare.
It's noteworthy that these people swim in the sea or something.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you can imagine the image of these lots of legionaries standing up to their neck in this lake, and the Carthaginians just sort of picking them off. I think so. It says. I think Polybius says the cavalry weighed in a bit, and it's just almost literally fish in a barrel. Quite a horrible image.
Yes, it's horrific.
And so Hannibal is sort of the two-time champ now, back to back, 218, 217.
Even worse, the victories are getting worse for the Romans. The 6,000 that escaped were captured by Hannibal the next day, according to Livy and Polybius, apparently, and apparently promised safe passage if they surrendered their armor and weapons, which they did. But then Hannibal sells them into slavery anyway. Apparently, who knows whether that's true? But the point is, they don't get away. The Carthaginians just wipe out 30 entire consular army, gone. And then within a day or two, another reinforcement force of 4,000 under a procurator, Gaius Centenius, were intercepted and destroyed as well. So this has been a really bad defeat for the Romans, and they've already had one really bad defeat and a humiliating embarrassment in a skirmish. So it's starting to look really quite dicey for the Romans. Hannibal's definitely asserting himself.
Well, badly. I mean, after Lake Trasimene, there's nothing between Hannibal and Rome now. Nothing. So this is the first time where the Romans are really like we've just lost the Battle of Britain sort of territory. We're just a sitting duck here. All he needs to do is turn up and we're done. So there's real panic in Rome now. It's not just like a bit of panic or what are our options next. It's like we're done for, we're doomed, sort of thing. But what they do, as you said, the Roman character is that they never just capitulate or give in or even really treat for terms or anything. Nope. So what they decide to do,
and they start persecuting each other as well. If people start suggesting things like surrender, this is very socially unacceptable. So you can talk about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what they do after we've talked about the character of the Romans just being sort of a bull-headed, just hitting things straight on always, is that they do actually realize at this point that maybe that's not going to work for them. So they end up getting Fabius Maximus to be a dictator. Plutarch says, where is it? He says, the situation demanded the absolute authority of a single man, because they realized that what Flaminius did was just sort of act as a free agent, which is not new for a consul to do, but that they really needed that not to be happening now. We really need, just as I say, a single guy. So they elect Fabius as dictator.
This is the Roman state going into total war mode.
Yeah, like turtling up,
centralizing all authority in a single point, and so Fabius can just speak and it will be done. You know, this is the Roman state turning into the total war mode.
Yeah, and I mean, Fabius is known for being defensive, for not doing that classic Roman thing of just butting heads with your enemy. So he's known, his whole thing is not doing that. And as you can imagine, would have been a lot of dissent, a lot of split opinion about that. But it seems that I mean, a lot of people called him a coward and things. We'll get onto that because his career lasts a while, all the rest of the war, more or less.
Because Fabius was right and Varro was wrong.
Yeah.
Very wrong.
So after Trasimene, it's sort of that is one of the windows Hannibal has to march on Rome itself and sack it. He decides not to at this point because he travels down beyond Rome and into southern Italy, basically, over the next year.
So it's important to note here that Hannibal's strategy is to detach Rome's allies from Rome. He's trying to win people over. This is the reason that he doesn't sack cities. It's not that he couldn't, although it would be a waste of men, but he doesn't do any damage to any of his hosts because he's trying to build an alliance against Rome that he will then lead to humble the Romans sufficiently. And that's what he's down there to do, isn't it?
Yeah. Lots of people said that, although we're not explicitly 100% sure, but a lot of people say, and I agree, that Hannibal's ultimate aim, war goal, was to bring the Romans to treat with him on his terms, not to annihilate them. He couldn't annihilate. Yeah, he just wants them to bend the knee. He doesn't want to sort of actually kill every man, woman, and child. So yeah, that's sort of his goal. And I mean, apparently, what Flaminius's his idea, his grand idea, was that he thought that Hannibal was. Plutarch says that he thought Hannibal was like a flame which flares up brightly but has little fuel to sustain it. In other words, can we just, it doesn't look like we're going to be able to beat this guy in a battle, but can we just sort of starve him out, for want of a better word?
Will he destroy himself,
But before we get to Canna, there is another, Geronium, another character comes into it, a guy called Minucius. So even though this Fabius Maximus is the dictator, sort of a special office, where it comes up later, Caesar himself takes that role, doesn't he, in generations to come? So it's sort of a special honor, and he appoints his second in command, like a commander of the horse, a master of the horse, and it's this guy called Minucius. And again, Minucius is a hothead who wants to get stuck in, and Fabius is the conservative one. But it's sort of on steroids here. Fabius is ultra conservative, doing everything to not engage, really, to the point of it being a bit embarrassing. And Minucius is just your classic, it's a humiliation not to fight. So just let me at them, sort of thing.
Well, so what wasn't Hannibal trying to gain access to winter quarters in Geronium?
That's it. That's exactly it. Yeah.
So I can't remember because this is, if I recall correctly, this is a very interesting bit because there's a lot of there's like a big skirmish that goes on for ages that Fabius is dragged into by Minucius. Because the consular armies, they operate as two separate detachments, and because each one's in command of each one's part, and they can't decide on a strategy. Is that correct?
Yeah. When they get at some point, Minucius gets given joint dictatorship with Fabius, which is sort of defeats the point. The whole point of having a dictator. You may as well just call there may be two consuls again.
Yeah.
And they can't decide. It's not even clear. It's not sort of written in law whether they will either split the command and have two separate armies, or whether they will just each day change command. And that's happened before and been disastrous before already in Roman history. So they decide they're going to split the command and have two separate armies, basically. And Fabius stays up in the hills far away, out of attack range from Hannibal. But this Minucius goes down into the plain near-ish Geronium and starts sort of engaging with Hannibal. And Hannibal does his classic thing of just outwitting them, outgeneraling them.
Yeah.
And but Fabius already is coming in for a bit of stick.
Yeah, but so Fabius, after Trasimene, Fabius adopts the delaying strategy, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And so this is the product of that. This is why Minucius got his command, because he was promising that he would go and engage Hannibal, right? So yeah, it's like Fabius's tactic is hugely unpopular with the Romans because this is antithetical to the Roman character. And it's humiliating as well. And this is like in Geronium is one of the only places where Hannibal starts ravaging the countryside and leaving Fabius's estates untouched, doesn't he?
Oh yeah, leaving his that was sort of a political move, as if
amazing political move. Is Fabius being paid off by Hannibal? Don't attack him. Let him burn everything, and Fabius's estates are fine. You know, I mean, like good PR, Hannibal. Very clever. It's all psychological. It's all psychological.
And apparently it works quite well. Some people are fooled by that. They do have suspicions about Fabius because of that. But I mean, much of the criticism of him and his strategy is because what he does, he keeps his men in the hills above the tree line, and just watching, just mirroring Hannibal wherever he's going to go in Italy. Just keep an eye on him and really not engage. And people have accused him this Fabius at the time of being Hannibal's governess or Hannibal's nanny. In the footnote, it's quite a funny footnote.
That's very good.
In Plutarch, it says when it calls in his governess, the footnote says there is no precise English equivalent to convey the scorn implied by the word pedagogus. To a Roman, the word signified a male slave employed to attend children on their walks or back and forth from school. So it's quite an insult to say. One of the other things was that, again from Plutarch, that the dictator, quote, took great trouble to provide them, his own men, to provide them with splendid seats to witness the spectacle of Italy being laid waste by fire and sword. Somewhere else, I haven't got the exact quote here, but somewhere else it says it's given them a great seat in the clouds, that they're staying up there. But this Minucius gets defeated in the field, not exactly wiped out, but certainly defeated. There's a bit of a back and forth over a few days, but then Hannibal sort of gets the measure of him, gets his number, and in the end beats him. And Fabius has to come out from the hills to sort of just about save the day. And then it's after that Minucius says, you know, I'm so sorry. I take everything back. You are my father. I completely relegate myself to under your command again, and I'm sorry.
Well, that's the thing. Hannibal gives Minucius a huge mauling. The Wikipedia article is just 5,000 killed in the initial skirmish and then thousands killed in the battle. So we don't know. But it's obvious that Hannibal did not come off the worst for this. That the Romans obviously did, which is why Minucius bends his knee to Fabius's superior understanding of what not to do in this case. So he winters there. Does he not?
Yeah, that's right. So he winters there, and apparently it's a really perfect place to winter in terms of logistics and stores that they steal, and just as geographically where it is, apparently it's just a perfect spot. So he's able to winter there, and the Romans are essentially, well, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say they're scared. They don't really know how they're going to beat him. One of the things Fabius is meant to have said is that he appreciates that Hannibal is like a wrestler. He's not just a sledgehammer. He's not just a freight train. He's a guy that's going to do sort of grips on you and do flips and holds and things that you've never seen before. And that if you at least appreciate that that's what you're dealing with, that's sort of half the battle right there. So again, after this Geronium, Fabius is sort of seen as vindicated. You know, people think, okay, Fabius was right all along. We should give, and from then on, he's got a great amount of prestige, even though it is still a bit embarrassing what he's doing. People do go along with it, and it seems like his prestige goes through the roof at that point.
But what does Varro do to usurp this?
All right, so the next year ticks around. There's another bit, another episode just before Canna where Hannibal is in the Vulturnus Valley, or the Arga Vulturnus, sort of. You know that anecdote where he's sort of seems to be trapped. Yeah. Do you want to tell it?
Yeah, sure. So they're playing cat and mouse as usual, and he's in some mountainous valley somewhere in central Italy, and Fabius has Hannibal pinned in a very disadvantageous position. I can't remember exactly what it was now. But so in the dead of night, Hannibal thinks of a cunning plan, and he takes this herd of cattle, ties like pitch and straw to the horns of the cows, and sets them on fire in the middle of the night, so they look like men carrying torches. And then he gets a few of his men to lead them out through a different defile. The Romans up and march down to intercept them, and find that it's just a bunch of cows, and the Carthaginians, the entire army has just gone the other way, out for a different exit. And that's it. There we go. Hannibal's out of danger, and the Romans look like brainlets. It's again just another way of showing that Hannibal was just smarter than everyone else around him.
Yeah, and this is a real embarrassment for Fabius, because one of his whole things was supposed to be that okay, we're not going to engage him in a battle and get wiped out like Trebia or Trasimene again, but at least he can't outgeneral us in the hills. Well, he can't, but he does do that. He does even do that. So it's sort of like the whole foundation that Fabius's reputation is built upon. Even that looks shaky at this point. And again, you can imagine the general Roman feeling for is like, who is this guy? Is like a shadow of again, when 200 years later, you can understand that they think of him as almost like a mythical figure, that's something more than human, because he just keeps doing this sort of thing.
Like he's like a force of nature. It's just like, and he's taking the initiative. Like if a lava flow starts coming out of the mountain coming towards your house, you don't think, right, how can I change the lava flow? You're like, right, I've got to change where my house is. I've got to move. It's like there's no stopping it. And that's how Fabius approaches it. Like, how can we mitigate the damage it does? Where it's at.
Yeah. Well, and so the next year rolls around after Hannibal gets out of that valley. Well, a couple of things quickly just on that. There's a few details where they tied firebrands to the horns of cows, and they all walked along in single file and looked like an army. Like it's one of those things. Did they? That doesn't really sound realistic. It doesn't really sound like that would work. But I don't know. That's what the accounts say.
But the thing is, like, it might well have looked convincing, because it would have been like a mile or two away. And so there would just be little pinpricks of light in the distance.
Yeah, and I think it was in. I think it's in Livy. He says it was only when the cows' horns were burnt down to the quick, when the cows themselves started getting spooked and running around manically, and that was when the Romans were like, "Wait, what's going on? What? Oh my God, we've been duped." But again, it's a funny, almost a funny story, isn't it?
But the thing is, it's the sort of story that sounds like it might have come from something. Because it's like, if you made it up, you'd be like, no, they didn't. I wouldn't believe my own story,
But again, it's one of those things, you can imagine someone slightly less competent might have attempted that.
Yeah.
And it didn't work. But this, once again, seems to have worked perfectly, just like clockwork.
Hannibal's Midas touch.
Like he wrote the script,
Yes.
It's great.
Yeah, it is. It is literally like everything's playing to Hannibal's script. He controls everything. It's amazing.
So the next year rolls around, 216,
Yeah.
And one of the things the Romans, again, every year you get new consuls, and for the year 216, it's Varro and a guy called Paulus Emilius. So they're the two guys in charge. And what Rome decide to do?
Well, hang on a second.
Sure.
Let's let people know a bit about Varro first.
Okay.
Because Varro has been stomping around the Senate for the last 6 months or so, saying that he's going to raise the largest army that Rome has ever raised, and then go and whap Hannibal with it.
Yeah.
In a just straight up fight. And that's exactly what a large portion of the Roman population want to hear. They are sick of being humiliated by Hannibal and intimidated and cowed in fear, and then having the dictator Fabius, who's just like, no, I'm going to be his little wet nurse and just help him, walk him around Italy. Like, there's going to be a large portion of the population who are just like, no, just fuck it, we'll just go big, or fuck it, let's go the whole way. And this is the kind of force that Varro and Paulus come in with, isn't it?
Yeah. So they decide. So apparently at Trebia they had 2 consular armies, so 2 legions.
Yeah.
And then at Trasimene they had more. It's like 4 legions.
Yeah.
Which was unprecedented already. And so what they decide in 216 is we'll double it up again.
Yeah.
We'll have 8 legions, which maybe in the age of Antony and Augustus, it doesn't sound like a great deal, but it was a great deal. They were much bigger then, and it was completely unprecedented to have that many guys. Yeah. And so they raised them. And
I mean, it's nearly 90,000 men.
A
huge number of men.
Yeah, we're talking 85, 90,000 guys. And it's,
Hannibal arrived in Italy with like 20,000 men after crossing the Alps. Yeah. So they've raised 80,000 men, fresh men, like Hannibal's army's exhausted. They've fought a bunch of battles. They're worried about food supplies. They're walking around Italy. They've been through marches over mountains. They're, innumerable wounds and hardships. And the largest Roman army ever assembled is being rallied in the field of Mars at the moment.
Yeah.
It's not good news for Hannibal.
No, Rome are just sort of doubling or redoubling up on their thing of, let's just have a sledgehammer. If it's big and strong enough, surely this will do
After
it.
all,
surely.
At Trebia, the armored fist had punched through, and at Trasimene it had too. And it wasn't because they were failing. What they'll just do is go to a nice big open plain and absolutely steamroll Hannibal. Anyone, how are you going to argue it? Hannibal's got 40,000, 50,000 men. We'll just get twice that number and just walk over him. Easy pitch in the Senate, I tell you.
And you can imagine they would have told themselves, oh, well, we were sort of, there was a lot of gamesmanship at Trebia. Yeah. And we were totally cheated at Trasimene.
It was an ambush.
Yeah. So we just need a normal battle, and we'll surely win.
Yeah.
But Plutarch says of Varro, this Varro guy, he says, quote, his utter lack of experience was equaled only by his self-confidence. It soon became clear that he was prepared to risk everything on a single throw.
Well, people liked it because they put him in charge.
Yeah. Absolutely. So Canna, the site of Canna is sort of 3/4 of the way down Italy on the eastern side, on the eastern side of the Apennines.
The Romans used it as a grain depot, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, the town of Canna near there. Yeah. And
which is why it was actually strategically important.
Yeah, that's why Hannibal was down there. So the army is called sort of amazingly large. That the Carthaginians must have seen this giant host. It was a few miles long, and you can imagine they thought to themselves, "Oh shit, the dream's over.
Yeah,
we're done here." But apparently Hannibal wasn't particularly fazed by it, and he was able to. Again, it's that thing. His man management is among his best skills. That he was able to hold everyone together. And be like, no, we're gonna meet these guys and we're gonna win.
Yeah. The balls on the man though. I just can't get over it. Like his own army's like, come on.
There's one bit apparently that happened just before the battle, on the day of the battle, just before, all the sort of senior top brass, including Hannibal himself, are sort of standing around or on horseback or whatever, and they
Probably
all
looking at a
start.
map and thinking, "Shit, are you serious?"
Oh no, there's of the morning of it. There's a bit. It's only in Plutarch, and they all start laughing. The men see that all the top brass laughing, like sort of heartily among themselves, and they take a lot of what's the word, morale from that, because they think, if our guys are sort of laughing and whooping it up, we must be in a good position. And what it was apparently, because one of the Carthaginian generals is called Gisco or Gisco, and in Plutarch it says that Hannibal says to him, "There is another thing that you have not noticed, Gisco, which is even more amazing. The fact that in all this enormous host opposite us, there isn't a single man called Gisco."
Yeah, this is a very strange and cryptic thing for Hannibal to have said, and I've mused on this quite extensively.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I know, I really have, because
I always thought it was a funny line.
well, like I kind of do, but the thing is, Hannibal's too smart to just because it doesn't sound very intelligent as a line to me, and Hannibal's too smart to not have a double meaning to whatever he's saying there, because like you say, they're watching the Roman troops pour into the plain of Cannae, and is spooking them. And you would think, you would understandably be concerned about it, because you're seeing this unbelievable sized army, thinking, right, okay. I mean, the Carthaginians will never have seen an army that big themselves. Like, they've never had they've never had like 90,000 soldiers opposing them, let alone, Roman soldiers. And on an open field where the Carthaginians have got about 50,000 men. So it's nearly 2-to-1 size ratio in the difference of the armies here. And it's, there's no clever tricks. Hannibal hasn't set out a line of, a hidden squad of cavalry or something, because there's nowhere to hide them. It's just a big open plain between like a river and the sea. And so it's just like, okay, this is like, now it's not even like being a sneaky bastard, right? Hannibal's just like, okay, we'll just have this big open field battle with as many men as you can fit on the field, and we'll see how it goes. And so, like you say, to say, well, of all the men on the other side, not one of them is called Gisgo. What does he mean by that? I guess he's been describing to them some kind of mythic destiny, right? And in this, surely in this story, there is a place for a character called Gisgo, and he will be a core part of this mythic tale that will be told. That's how I always imagined that he had been selling this, because Gisco, well, obviously not Hannibal. They're Romans. There's going to be a lot of Marcuses down there, probably. Duh. But what are we going to do about the nearly 100,000 Romans that have turned up? But instead, so Hannibal gives them like a narrative sounding response, rather than anything that's actually observant about the situation, which I found really interesting.
Yeah. I always thought that line was just saying, well, one, it's just trying to add a touch of levity in what might have seemed a desperate moment. And also sort of, when you big people up comically, like saying Chuck Norris under his beard is a fist. That sort of thing. I think he was doing that with Gisco. It's like, well, we've got you, dude. We're definitely going to win, like almost as a joke. I don't know.
It could be. I don't know.
It is quite an ambiguous line, though, to be fair. It doesn't. Yeah, it's not completely clear exactly what he means. No. Yeah, I suppose you're right.
And the thing is with Hannibal is, like, especially in his later life, you don't get much of a sense of humor out of him from the interactions that he has with the people around him. Maybe obviously it's because down the line he's got profound losses. But maybe why wouldn't they be in good spirits, to be honest? I'd be in bloody good spirits if we'd just had 2-3 victories in a row, solid victories in a row, and now the Romans have done exactly what I wanted. And it's important to remember, this is exactly what Hannibal wants the Romans to do. Hannibal wants them to raise just the biggest, fattest army they can raise and come at me, bro. This is literally what he wants. And so I guess we'll talk about the deployment of the troops on the
Yeah.
battlefield, because this is really interesting stuff.
Well, one thing just quickly before that, just to stress one point you made. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's nothing. I've heard people say he wasn't using any dirty tricks. There's no sort of use of elephants, or anything like
They're all
that.
dead.
And well, yeah, they're all dead. And that, yeah, it's sort of well, I'm sure most people listening to this will know that this is one of, if not the Romans' most landmark battles. It's something, again, like Brennus or worse, is scarred into their psyche after this day, because apart from anything else, their army is filled with the cream of their aristocracy, isn't it? That's something that comes back. It's not just a load of conscripts. It's everyone that they can really muster, including from all the noble families. So everyone's there. Everyone who's anyone is there.
I mean, the army is always populated by the sons of and the aristocrats themselves, the nobles themselves, at the best of times. But especially now, it's absolutely packed to the rafters. I mean, like at the end of this battle, some hundreds of senators have died. All these really famous, important men of the state, they're all killed. So yeah, it's hard to overemphasize just how important this army is, frankly.
Yeah. Well, one thing I'd say that all three of the main sources, Plutarch, Livy, and Polybius, all mention is that there's a sort of a hot, scorching wind, dusty wind that's blowing in the faces of the Romans. And apart from anything, it's I say little things. Maybe it isn't a little thing, but things like this sort of can really matter. And apparently, that did quite matter on that day. That this dusty wind blowing in their faces.
Yeah, totally. And again, it's just like we were saying with Trebia. Hannibal just takes all of the small advantages and loads them on his sides. 'Cause, I mean, he chooses the battlefield. He's the one in control of when the Romans are engaging, and they don't seem to understand that. They think that them being really aggressive is them taking control of the situation, and it's not. Fabius was taking control of the situation, and he managed to pin Hannibal until he escapes. So it's Hannibal is just clearly smarter than the average Roman leader. And it shows. But anyway,
it's one of those things when you said he really wants them to just attack head on. I'd say it's a little more than that. He needs them to, actually. His battle plan relies upon that completely. If for whatever reason the Romans had somehow done something creative and different and weird and innovative at Canna, Hannibal would have been in a lot more trouble. But as it turns out, I mean, do you want to describe the formations again?
I'll
this
do
is
it,
certainly studied.
This is a legend in ancient battlefield techniques. So basically, Hannibal has got a single long line normally. And if you go back to Trebia, again, he just arranges his men in a straight line, and the Romans punch through the center of it it's the momentum, it's the weight that they can just force the other guys back and then eventually break their lines and then move through past them. And so Hannibal has clearly learned his lessons here, because what he does is he puts the Gauls in the center with his crack African infantry on the side, which, if you're thinking, well, if you're going to resist them, you would want the strong, phalanxes from the Libyans in the center to, be the weights that would be pushing against the Romans. But the thing is, the Romans are 3 lines deep with men, and the Carthaginians have 1 line. And so the idea that you're going to be able to resist them is wrong. It's obviously not going to happen. And so Hannibal kind of judos them by, instead of having a straight line, he has it in a sort of arrow or crescent formation going forward, like a bent bow. So the Gauls impact with a small amount of the Roman line, and then get pushed back by the Romans as the Romans continue advancing, until the next line behind them on either side gets impacted and then get pushed back, and then the outside line get pushed back, and then eventually it becomes a straight line against the Romans and then starts bending outwards. And so the Romans are actually filling in this concave space. And because of the way that the point of the impact hits the Roman lines, it brings them in, because they want to move to get towards, actually get at the Gauls in their haste to kill things. And so you end up with the African army actually flanking the Roman army without having moved a muscle. And in all of this, Hannibal has been right in the very center on the front with the Gauls in order to make sure that they don't run away.
It's glorious, isn't it?
It's unbelievably glorious. and literally, but the distance that they have to move is about, I mean, I'm looking at a map now. It's about 3/4 of a mile retreat that the Gauls have, but it's not a retreat. It's just they're being pushed back, but they managed to keep the cohesion of their line, so the Romans can't break through and start chewing their positions up. And so in the end, the Romans are like packed in 3 deep into this big concave but complete semicircle of Carthaginian troops. And while this has been happening, on either flank, obviously the cavalry, the Spanish on one side and the Numidian on the other, go and attack the Roman cavalry and the Roman camp, or like go past the Roman camp. And they drive off the Roman cavalry, chase them off the battlefield, and then come back into the rear of the Roman army. So you have, I mean, it's probably about 70,000 Roman troops trapped within absolutely encircled by Carthaginian soldiers. And this creates a hellhole, a massacre that goes on all afternoon until nightfall. And we're told by, I think it's Plutarch, or I can't remember who it was, Livy or someone, but the Roman infantry, because they're surrounded on all sides and they're losing horribly, they're packed together and drawing away from the Carthaginians. They're afraid of being struck. And so they can't even raise their weapons as the Carthaginians step in and cut them down, and then step in and cut the next ones down and the next ones. And they must have just been stepping over corpses all day. And their arms must have been weary with just slicing and hacking, and like it must have smelled awful, it must have sounded awful, it must have just been this day of hell. And at the end of it, the Carthaginians had only lost like 4,000 men out of their 50,000 army, and the Romans have lost about 50 to 70,000 men in one day, in one afternoon, all dead on the battlefield.
Their worst defeat that they ever suffered, really.
I think they actually have one worse, which is when the Teutones and the Cimbri invade. They lose 200,000 men in one day.
Oh, blimey.
Yeah.
When's that exactly?
The first century, I think it is. It's whenever the Cimbri and Teutones invade. It's after this.
But yeah, so the Carthaginians end up completely surrounding this giant body of Roman foot soldiers, and it just turns into a huge kill box.
It's unreal.
And I think there's even accounts of some Romans burying their head in the ground. That seems a bit crazy, silly. Did that ever really happen? That sounds mental, but apparently that happened. And crushed in, really sort of crushed in, and some sort of hellish crush. And you can only imagine the scene at the end of the day at Canna would have been almost unparalleled scene of horror. I mean, you're talking about the first day of the Somme, or a nuclear bomb sort of territory here. 8, possibly 60, 70,000 corpses in a really small area. Disgusting.
And then and then you've got the wounded as well, because not all of these will be dead. They'll just be laying there wounded and crying out in pain. Polybius says 5,700 killed on the Carthaginian side, so it's over 10-1 losses for the Romans. And like, so many important people, so many noblemen, the pillars of Roman society, are being just hacked down in a double envelopment by a numerically inferior by almost half force. This is a miracle. This is like a battlefield fucking miracle. There is no way that is reasonable for the Romans to think this is about to happen, because there's no reason you'd think that. No one has ever done anything like this. You wouldn't think it'd be possible in the slightest. And then suddenly this guy with an army half your size has suddenly enveloped your entire army and wiped it out. And you're just like, what the fuck? As Varro must have thought as he fled back to Rome. being the only commander there that actually survives it as well. The irony, the fucking irony that you, and the goal that you didn't have the balls to stay there and die. You chose this, Varro. You brought this about on top of everyone's heads, and you're the one who survives.
Well,
fucking coward.
One quick thing I'll say before we move on to the events after it was that, I mean, this battle seems like just a perfect win again. And it is. I mean, it is. But these things are always in the balance, though, until they are decided. And one footnote I've got again from Plutarch puts it quite succinctly. It says Plutarch's account of the fighting is written with a large degree of hindsight. The issue was finally balanced. If Hannibal's centre had been broken before the Numidian cavalry could attack from the rear, the battle would have been lost.
Yeah,
they just state that. They don't qualify it any further.
Oh, that's true.
But one thing I say about the Numidian cavalry, it comes up time and again, isn't it? That they seem to be very disciplined, very elite, very fast. They seem to swing battles on their own, more or less.
Completely.
They come up a lot, don't they?
Yeah, and it's losing these that ends up breaking Hannibal, to be honest, I think.
Yeah. A few men did escape, or a fair few men did escape, including Scipio the Younger, who later becomes Africanus. He's there. He's still young. He's an officer. He was about 17 years old, I think, at Ticinus. This is only a couple of years later, so he's still quite very young. And he's there as an officer, and he does actually manage to, him and a small contingent, fight their way out of this encirclement, and he actually survives. Along with a few other guys. It's not every single man is butchered, but still, as you said, and a lot of the cream of the aristocracy. There's that great anecdote, isn't there, that if you're a patrician, i.e. a member of the upper class, really, a lot of these guys all wore rings, a specific sort of signet ring or something, and so the Carthaginians go around the battlefield afterwards collecting all these rings, and I think they've got hundreds of them.
Mago is it? Who went? So we're getting a bit ahead there, but after the battle, Hannibal sends Mago over to Carthage to try and get some reinforcements and supplies. And what Mago ends up doing is just pouring out a pot of these rings onto the floor of the Senate and saying, "Look, these are the rings of Roman patricians that we've taken from battle. Send us some supplies so we can take Rome." It's like hundreds and hundreds. That's
a great image, isn't it? All these rings spilling out on the floor.
I mean, the Carthaginian Senate must have been like, "Well, you've been busy." So it's going well in Italy then. And in fact, that's one of their arguments. One of the parties who are against the war argues that literally, well, if you're doing so well, why do you need our help? Oh, come on, you dicks. Get your backs into it. The Romans are completely committed at this point, and we know because we're killing them by the tens of thousands. So, you've got to be committed too.
Well, it's one of those examples, like we said before, probably this is one of the main examples of when the Carthaginian Senate sort of make maddening decisions as far as we're concerned, or if you're rooting for Hannibal in any way. Their decisions to be like, no, this is your campaign, your war, your baby, you pay for it. If you can get it done on the cheap, good for you, brilliant. Exactly but we're not giving loads of money and loads more men. Like, you're doing well, aren't you? Like, you're undefeated, aren't you? You're on your own. Which, if they'd just given him a bit of money or some guys at that point, how different history might have been. But that's the decision they make.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, they don't abandon the war or anything, because remember, Carthage is prosecuting the war at sea, which is where it's actually much better equipped to do so. But even then, they don't do very well against the Romans. The Romans just raise fleets and just barrel into them head first, and the Carthaginians get cut up a lot of the time, and it's quite strange to watch, because you'd think they'd have taken more pride in their navy, but they're not very competent on the sea, in my opinion. And,
I think by this point, the Romans are significantly better than they were just one generation ago. The classic thing is in the first Punic War, at the beginning stages of the first Punic War, the Roman navy was either non-existent or just inept.
But the Carthaginians,
much better. Sorry, Tom.
No, the Carthaginians do have something like 90 triremes that are harassing the western coast of Italy and patrolling up and down it at points during Hannibal's, this sort of time. So it's not like the Carthaginians are doing nothing. But the thing is, they send reinforcements to Spain to prevent the Romans from capturing the silver mines and all the other resources of Spain. Which, I mean, okay, yeah, I can understand why you would do that. But if you funneled those resources to Italy, you could take Rome out of the war entirely, and then you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, the Italian campaign isn't going on in isolation. You're quite right. There's still shit going on in Sardinia, on naval stuff around Sicily. The Iberian campaign never stops.
Nope.
And as I mentioned before, there's all shit going on in the east, in Macedonia, in the Greek theatre, that's still going on, bubbling away.
Yeah.
In fact, it's lucky, historians have noted it's very lucky for Rome that the armies of Greece and Illyria and Macedonia aren't they're at a bit of a low ebb themselves. If they'd had a 40,000 man army of their own to
if
to
Pyrrhus
Hannibal,
had come across now,
yeah, exactly, yeah,
they would have been all over.
Yeah. Just before we move on though from the battle of Canna itself, there's one bit.
Well, yeah, sorry, I wanted to go back to it because we haven't finished talking about this. It's too big,
Well, there's one bit where it says again in Plutarch that when Hannibal sees that he's probably has won the day or is going to win the day, that he's supposed to have remarked, quote, "This is better than having them all delivered over to me bound hand and foot." And you can imagine his plan is, he knows that, obviously he knows his own plan is to bend his line backwards and hopefully get an encirclement going on. And you can imagine that sort of when he sees it happening, it is playing out.
Yeah.
He must just be like, yeah, come, rubbing his hands together like this is actually it's working, it's happening. We're gonna.
This has never been done before. It's never been done before, and he's learning on what he had experienced in earlier battles. So, you can imagine it, can't you? When the cavalry comes back and then they're all in circles, Hannibal's like watching it from I don't know, horseback or wherever he is, and it looks like shit. The Romans are all trapped, and the Romans start then shrinking away. Now there's no forward momentum pushing forward, and now they're starting to contract in, and suddenly the ranks are starting to get cut down. And Hannibal's like, yes, this is exactly what I expected. And then imagine getting to the fucking I mean, the thing is, like, what a horrible way to go for the average Roman legionary, right? Because you're in the middle of tens of thousands of men, and you're there for 4 or 5 hours before they get to you and kill you.
Yeah.
So you're like, Christ, you're just trapped there going, what? Are we all going to die? Yeah, I think we're going to die, mate. When? About 3 hours? You mean I've got to stand here for 3 hours and then get killed? Yeah. Well, what can you do? You can't do anything. Like, we're trapped.
Yeah, and you can just
toilet.
You can just see the momentum against you. I don't know if I've played in a few sports teams, and sometimes you can just feel that the momentum is against you. You can just feel it; it's in the air. And imagine having that in a battle. It must be just a horrible feeling. And Hannibal must just be like, I'm the 3-time champion, back to back. Consecutive years. There's no one better.
Yeah, literally, I'm the prize fighter of the century. Eat it, Alexander. But the thing is, I just can't get over like how bad it must have been, because the field is like 2 or 3 miles long. Like 100,000 men or 90,000 men, like only 14,000 escape. The rest are killed or captured. So you're looking at about 70,000 people. And that just takes up like miles of battlefield, like half a mile deep. And
the smell.
Yeah, and you're walking on the corpses, they'd have littered the battlefield thickly. And it must take ages to pick them over. And I mean, it sounds like you're going to get PTSD, from, if you just think about it, like Hannibal, I'm sure I read some of that. Hannibal was like slightly like grossed out at his own abilities here. Like this is I've read a bunch of different books, so I can't remember which narrative this one would have come from, but I remember reading a book years ago where it talks about how Hannibal was looking at the destruction that he has wrought, and they put this down to being a factor in why he didn't march on Rome afterwards, and because it must have just been unreal carnage. Like this.
Yeah,
it's hard to imagine because nothing like it would have ever happened before.
Yeah, no, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. No, you're absolutely right. It's hard to imagine because even in sort of the Battle of the Somme, say, it was over many, many miles of front. It wasn't all in one spot, one round little spot.
Yeah.
So
It would have been a field, a couple of miles long, just of corpses.
Yeah. And of the two consuls, Paulus and Varro, as you say, Varro gets away. He's able to gallop away, but he's not unwounded. It says that Plutarch says, quote, "His head and face were so streaked and disfigured with blood that scarcely anyone could recognize him. But yet he does get away and he gets back to Rome. And you might imagine he would be vilified, possibly executed for such a failure, but he's not. They sort of, I don't know why, it's not really properly explained in the sources. But the fact that he was quite heavily wounded counted for something. I don't know. But the other consul, Paulus, does die in the field, and it's sort of a bit of a sad, touching moment when he's sort of giving his last words to one of his lieutenants that's able to flee. Tell my family I love them, sort of a thing. Yeah.
But it is. There are a bunch of decisions like that in the course of this war that are made that, if you think about it in hindsight, are really strange. Like, I don't want to again spoil anything, but like, since it's appropriate, like at the very end of the war when Carthage loses, nothing happens. Like, Scipio just signs the peace and then goes home. Like, Hannibal is left in Carthage. Like, that's such a bizarre thing. You'd be like, what you? I mean, imagine getting back to Rome. It's like, oh god, right? Did you defeat him? Yeah. Oh, great. What happened? Well, what do you mean? I signed the peace and went home. It's like, well, where's Hannibal? He's dead. No, he's just at Carthage. Like, what? You left this guy in Carthage after defeating them? Yeah. Why not? I didn't think about it. Like, what are you doing? Like.
Yeah, that is a funny thing. It's like when Napoleon is defeated, he's just exiled. There's no question that they're going to execute him. It's like, why not? You execute his marshals and things.
Yeah. But at least they didn't just leave him in France. Like, oh yeah, we've defeated Napoleon now. Yeah, you can go back to Paris, Boney. Like, they just leave Hannibal in Carthage. It's like, okay, that's mad.
Yeah, well, so I mean, the next bit after this, I suppose, is sort of sorry.
Yeah, well, we've got to talk about the march on Rome that didn't.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, so now again for the second time, there's no army standing between Hannibal and Rome.
Well, hang on, before we even go that. So when the survivors get back to Rome, we're told, I think it's Livy who says he's not even going to try and describe the level of fear in Rome, because he wouldn't be able to do it justice with words. And I think that's very true. I think that's definitely going to have been the case, because the Romans are obviously thinking, right, this is the biggest army ever. This is all or nothing. We're obviously going to win this. They can't possibly lose. And so the Romans must have been on edge in Rome, but feeling pretty confident. Like, Varro's going to come back. He'll have delivered a knockout punch. This will be great. War over, we win as usual. And then he comes back and it's so no. And it's not okay. Well, how many of the army survive? Like, we'll regather the troops, and then we'll continue Fabius's strategy. There are no troops. Like, they're all dead. Hannibal has eaten the entire fucking army. Like, this is what do you mean? On an open plain? Yes, on an open plain. What happened? He surrounded us. How did he surround you? Well, we don't know. He just suddenly there were Carthaginians on all sides, and they killed everyone. We were the few thousand to get out, and we were lucky to be alive. And they got punished as well, didn't they? They got sent to like some penal legions or something.
Well, they got sent down to Sicily. I think it's the 4th and the 5th, or the 5th and the 6th Legion. The remnants of them that survived at Canna were sort of banished to I think Sicily somewhere, and they come back into the story a bit later. But the panic in Rome. That's sort of the headline at this point of the narrative. It's just pure, almost indescribable panic in Rome, because they're certain this time, in this window of time, they're certain that Hannibal's going to do a Brennus on them. and it's one of those things. You think you're quite secure, and your civilization and your city are quite secure. I'm talking about nowadays, us in London. But civilization or society is quite paper thin, and it can be ripped apart when you didn't see it coming. And of course, they know this from Brennus, again, to hark back to that. And they think this is imminent now. But sort of, again, one of those sort of famous things in history is that he makes the decision not to march on Rome.
Well, right. Okay, so which theory do you adhere to here? Because I have a lot of thoughts on this.
Well, I'll give you my sort of personal opinion.
Go on.
I think it's a case of in case of the right tool for the right job.
Mm-hmm.
You need the right type of army to besiege a large city. And Hannibal's army wasn't that. It wasn't the right tool. Again, as I likened it earlier to a high-performance sports car or a race car, it works in a very specific set of circumstances. He doesn't need an F1 car. He needs a bulldozer. You know, he needs a Bradley fighting vehicle or something. And he's got an LMP1 car that is going to get beached on a 3-inch bump. It's not the right tool for the job. I think it's that, and he knew that. And even though his army's just not big enough, I think, to take Rome. And one other thing, that his grand strategy was never to do that. It was to bring them to heel. It was to make them treat on really favourable terms. He never designed to sack Rome. I think. What do you think?
Right. So there are some common assumptions there that I don't think are true.
Okay.
Because for example, at this point, Rome wasn't the giant metropolis that it would become at this point. It was obviously a big city, but I looked this up in preparation for
today, wasn't it? It had a complete.
Oh yeah, it had walls.
At this point.
Yeah, it had walls.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I looked this up in preparation for the other podcast that we were going to do and didn't. And now I can't remember this, like the size of it, but I'd looked up the circuit of the walls, and with say 40,000 men left after this battle, so let's say 10,000, 5,000 dead, and then say another 5,000 wounded, something like that. Even with 40,000 men, Hannibal could have easily invested this city. It was not that big. So the idea that the army wasn't good enough or big enough or something like that, no, it definitely was. Rome only had 2 legions in it as well, so it's 10,000 men, I think. So there's definitely a chance that Hannibal can come and take this city. And so I don't buy that. That's like Hans Delbrück's one where it's the wounded and stuff like that. Yeah, maybe. But then
if you interject, I agree with you. It's possible he had the numbers, but were they the right type though? I mean, like Numidian cavalry is of no use almost, for example.
Oh, Hannibal would have found a way. He would have found a way. He would have done it. It would have, the Midas touch would have come out, and he would have been like, Hannibal's, in the middle of the night, Hannibal spots a climbable point of the wall or something, and then sends like 5 guys over, and they open the thing, and then they pour in, and boom, they cut up the Romans, right? But I don't think that was Hannibal's plan at all. Like you said,
he A-teams his way out of it.
Yeah, basically, he'll figure something out because he's unbelievably smart. And the thing is, Rome isn't even that. It's not a very defensive position even. Like it's it's not like a VA or something. Like it can be approached from any side. But the thing is though, that's all by the by, because that would be contingent on the Romans having the will to resist, right? And I think that if Hannibal had let Mahabal rush ahead of the retreating Roman legions, or the few thousand men that escape, and arrive at the city first with 10,000 cavalry, suddenly turn up, and Mahabal just says, your entire army is destroyed, we are here to accept your surrender, or we're going to take the city by storm and kill you all. I think there's a good chance that at that point the Romans would have cracked. The Romans were not robots, they were in terror beyond describing, as according to Livy. If Hannibal had taken the initiative now, I think he could have forced their surrender, but I think he didn't, because I think he wanted them to come and beg and grovel and bend the knee, and that's why I think he didn't do it, and that's why he lost.
Yeah, no, I did.
I've been thinking about this for a long time.
Well, people have pondered it since it happened, haven't they?
Because we don't have any
exactly
answers.
Why that decision was made.
Yeah.
Well, Plutarch says this. He says, quote, if he pressed on, he would be dining on the Capitol on the 5th day after his victory. It's not easy to say what consideration can have made him back. It almost seems as if his evil genius or some divine power intervened at this moment, fill him with timidity and irresolution, which he now showed. This is why Barca, the Carthaginian, is reported to have said to him angrily, you know how to win a victory, Hannibal, but you have no idea how to exploit it.
Yeah.
And just quickly to add to that, the footnote, sometimes footnotes are great.
Yeah.
The introduction to these books and the footnotes are definitely worth reading if anyone giving it a go. Because the footnote says here, Many reasons have been suggested by various historians. Among the most obvious are that Hannibal's army by now mustered less than 20,000 men, that it was not equipped for a siege. The cavalry, which had played so important a part in victories, would have been useless for attacking a fortified city. Again, it's the obvious, I think, what a lot of people say. But I think what you said is perfectly as reasonable or valid. We don't know for sure.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line, isn't it? What was going through his mind.
Yeah, this is just a theory, but I think it's a theory that is borne out by a bunch of the facts that we have at hand. And I think that the other side of this doesn't explain the sudden timidity of Hannibal. Is he's not playing for any kind of psychological advantage after the battle, right? And that's very unusual for Hannibal. Almost everything that he does is playing for psychological advantage. And so the fact that he's not is him handing over the initiative to the Romans. And I think that the one reason, the whole strand of his entire life, is to get the Romans to bend the knee. And so I think that that must have been what he was waiting for, and which was undoubtedly infuriating for the people around him. It was Gisgo or whoever it is, Maribel, who were like, Hannibal, you know how to gain a victory, not how to use it. It's like that must have been so annoying. It's like, why don't we just go and make them surrender? Like, they've got no army, they're trapped in their city, they're pissing their pants. We can be there in days. They're going to be like, what the hell is going on? You were surrounded by the Carthaginians. Like, yes, you are. Give up. But I honestly, I'm pretty committed to the Hannibal wants to make the Romans bend the knee narrative. I'm sure of it. I'm sure I can feel it. You know.
I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah,
it does make perfect sense. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Plutarch says that the Roman feeling was, quote, boundless grief and helpless bewilderment.
Yeah.
So they're sort of tearing their hair out.
Yeah. All you need to do then is turn up with your 10,000 cavalry, knock on the door. They're gonna piss their pants and beg for life.
Yeah, I mean, what that is a great. It's all history stuff. It's like a great one right there. What if he had sort of pushed the envelope? But he doesn't.
Nope.
And it says that quite quickly they realise he's not going to as well, and this panic sort of abates fairly quickly, or they sort of use the impression that it's sort of, sometimes if you're ever in a panic and you can sort of drag yourself out of it in a moment, just sort of shake your head and just have clear eyes suddenly.
If it turns out there was no danger, like, oh, he's not going to do something, then.
And I suppose maybe at this point it might, because that's the last massive battle that happens in Italy. So, and as we said before, there's all sorts of other stuff going on all at the same time. And
well, should we do like a second part of this? Because it's I've got to be up fairly early tomorrow, unfortunately.
No worries. Yeah.
So like next week or something, should we like message Callum and see if we can get next Thursday in? Because like this is a good place to hinge it, because this is Hannibal's high point. This is, Hannibal has done the undoable. He's conquered the unconquerable, and now he's just at the foot of this. The summit of the greatest victory in all of military history in the Mediterranean world.
It's at the tippy top of the mountain and still only halfway up.